Chapter 103. In his previous impression, there were two ways to obtain advanced professions. One was to directly find a mentor to accept a mission, and the other was to rely on a mission item to trigger it when he reached level 10. The former was the most common and the most convenient, while the latter was more troublesome. But usually, the professions were slightly more powerful. He remembered that the official information said that this slightly was actually greatly modified. Obviously, the IMBA professions that were cut off had something to do with this method of obtaining professions. Thinking of this, Roddy could not help but look at the ring curiously. He suddenly had some expectations. Was it possible for the IMBA professions that were cut off to change professions in the world he was in? If this ring could change to Guardian of Light, it would definitely be awesome. He looked at the necklace of unknown origin again, and could not help but feel a little excited. Previously, he wanted to change professions to Ranger as soon as possible. Now, it seemed that, if there was a chance to change professions to those legendary IMBA professions, he would definitely choose it first. However, the reality was very harsh. Roddy stretched out his hand and touched his shoulder. The burning pain made him grimace for a while. He cursed under his breath, "This bastard undead is really strong." Then, he called out the mission panel in a low voice, wanting to see the rewards of this mission. Then, his eyes widened. Save the Dukes of Angmar, completed, and to stop Ansiden's conspiracy, completed, came into view. Roddy frowned in confusion. The first one was expected, but what was the meaning of the second one? He carefully looked at the description of the second mission. On it was written the words completion condition, kill the undead Alpha. Only then did Roddy understand that the undead he killed was not a simple character. But who is Ansiden? Previously, he heard Alpha say this name in the bedroom of the Ducal Palace, but Roddy only felt that it was a little familiar. At this time, he calmed down and thought for a long time, but he could not remember where he heard it from. In the end, he gave up resentfully. Looking at the mission rewards, he suddenly saw that in addition to the experience rewards, these two missions also had rewards related to the Rose Cross sect reputation. What the hell? I didn't take that blow for nothing. Roddy immediately sat up straight, but it also affected his wound, causing him to gasp in pain. When he came to his senses, he opened the reputation interface with trembling hand. He was pleasantly surprised to find that the Rose Cross sect's reputation bar had reached 95% of the friendly level. Just a little more and it would reach respected. What's going on? He was obviously in a daze. After doing some calculations, he realized that the reputation points rewarded by these two missions should not have been enough to raise him to this level. What went wrong? Scrolling through the quest window, Roddy saw two records of large reputation points, and the dates were exactly the day after the assassination. It was inexplicable, and he could not make sense of it at all. But who the hell would complain about having too many reputation points? Roddy took it as if he had won the lottery. He quickly flipped through the mission pane and found that the second step of the fall of Priest Nilda had yet to be handed over to Bishop Benjamin. He immediately beamed with joy and giggled, "I've hit the jackpot this time." Due to the assassination, Roddy had not been able to hand in this mission. Now that he thought about it, if he were to hand in this mission, not only would the Rose Cross sect's reputation reach respected, he would also be able to accumulate enough experience points to level up to level 11. He could also go to the Rose Cross sect's armory to purchase higher-level equipment, level 9 superior arrows, level 10 rare longbows, level 9 shields, and even more excellent weapons. Even if he did not change his profession and only leveled up the Legion soldier to level 10, after changing to a new bow and arrows, the damage would definitely be doubled. This was because level 10 was a huge threshold for equipment, and there was a fundamental difference in the damage value. I have to do this. I have to change the shotgun to a cannon. Thinking about how his arrows were knocked away by the assassin a few days ago, Roddy really felt that he had enough defense but not enough attack power. It was still fine against the unarmored orcs, but if the target was an advanced profession like Francis, the level 8 wooden short bow in his hand was really not enough. After the incident a few days ago, the bishop did not see his face, so Roddy was confident that if he swaggered into the monastery now, no one would catch him. Thinking about this, he could not help but be full of anticipation. He could only think about handing in the mission at the monastery the next day, a big update of equipment. Just thinking about it made him excited. Blowing out the candle and lying on the bed, Roddy did not even want to wash his face because of the pain. He did not even take off his clothes. He simply pulled the blanket over himself and was ready to have a good sleep. But just when he was about to fall asleep, he heard a lot of people walking up the stairs outside the door. F***ck. Even the CIA can't be this powerful, right? Roddy woke up with a start and was startled in a daze. The first thing in his mind was that it was the guards from the ducal palace who came to investigate. After all, he had just escaped and cut off the head of the head butler. Naturally, he would think that they were the guards. But when he got up and was ready to escape, he carefully identified the footsteps and let out a sigh of relief. It was the group of high-level adventurers who lived next door. "You're back so late. You must be out gambling or whoring." Throwing his head back on the bed, Roddy listened to the footsteps in front of the door. He did not want to pay attention to them, but in the dead of night, the soundproofing of the wooden building was not good. After the messy footsteps passed, Roddy, who was lying on the bed, could hear the other party's thick accent through the thin wooden board. "I need to study the terrain a few more times," Sir Gallop said. Silence. The person who spoke was probably the 2-meter-tall brawny man. His voice was deep and strong, but he was interrupted halfway by his companions. Then, their conversation became much softer, almost to the point of whispering. Roddy could not hear the content of the conversation, but his brows were still slightly furrowed. Obviously, the brawny man's words were enough to make him think of many things. If the other party said that, Roddy was 99% sure that it was not a good thing. In addition to the other party's high level and foreign accent, Roddy could not help but think that this group of people was a criminal gang who came from afar to seek revenge. As he recalled the actions of this group of people, Roddy suddenly remembered the gesture they made when they were eating. It seemed to be some kind of pre-meal prayer? Prayer is something only the church would use. Church. A ray of light flashed in his mind. Roddy's eyes widened abruptly. From his chaotic memory, he recalled a piece of information related to the strange gesture, the Viper Cross pre-meal prayer. Why is it this group of lunatics? Roddy could not help but sink into his memories. The origins of the Viper Cross and the Rose Cross were somewhat related. In the beginning, there was still a market among the players, but later on, they became paranoid people who could not stop taking drugs. In his memory, this sect did not do anything good. It seemed that the only reason for their existence was to go against the Rose Cross sect. At first, the players only thought that they were a group of fanatics who sacrificed themselves for their ideals, but later on, they realized that this group of people were a bunch of idiots. Other than being pig teammates, they were useless. Therefore, in the later stages of the game, the players basically began to collectively assist the Rose Cross in completely wiping them out of the kingdom. By the year 597, these people were rarely seen in the kingdom. It was said that they secretly moved to the mountains in the east of the kingdom, and their ambitions were greatly restrained. Thinking of this, Roddy could not help but sigh. He had randomly found a hotel, and he actually met a group of fanatics who were similar to the terrorists who tied bombs and self-destructed on television. But it just so happens that I can use your information to exchange for some reputation points. Roddy, whose mind was filled with thoughts of a big makeover, thought. The atmosphere in the Rose Cross Monastery was tense these few days because of the assassination. Sally wore a pure white robe. When she stepped into the corridor of the church, she could no longer hear the prayers of the believers in the past. Only the clanking of the armor of the patrolling guards echoed in the surroundings. Occasionally, there would be conversations, but they were all reports from the Templars after they had investigated certain corners. In these few days, the Rose Cross Holy Cathedral naturally began to investigate the assassination with great fanfare. In the eyes of outsiders, such an incident was obviously a provocation to the entire Holy Cathedral, and they would definitely not let the matter rest until the murderer was thoroughly investigated. But Sally understood that the Holy Cathedral was completely putting on a show, and in reality, they would not really investigate anything. After exchanging information with Bishop Benjamin about Roddy, she understood that Benjamin would not make things difficult for the Lucifron family and Roddy. But this did not mean that everything was fine. Instead, it meant that Sally had to get rid of Francis as soon as possible, and the longer this dragged on, the greater the risk Bishop Benjamin would have to bear. This bishop was going to be promoted today, and if Francis continued to act recklessly, it would greatly affect the highest position he could reach in the Holy Cathedral in the future. What should I do? Sally had been racking her brains for a solution for the past 2 days. Her subordinate, Martin, had not been able to contact Roddy, and this made her a little confused. She came to the church now to wait for today's news. Looking up, Sally looked at the empty seat and finally sighed. She muttered to herself, "Why can't I get in touch with him?" But soon, Martin came back with a message. He still could not get in touch with Roddy. Is that so? Disappointed, Sally left the church. But she did not expect that only a few minutes after she left, a guard entered the church and said to the inner court guard at the door, "Roy, there is an adventurer requesting to see Bishop Benjamin." "Buck, have you forgotten? This is a period of martial law, and the bishop will not see anyone. And he will not let anyone take a step in here." Chapter 104. Should we inform His Eminence? Today is different. The monastery is under martial law. Such a request should be rejected. While the temple guards were discussing, Friar Booker came to inform them of the change of guard time. He walked out of the front hall and saw the guards. "What happened?" he asked. The guards were in a dilemma. When they saw Booker, they immediately told him what had happened. Perhaps because of the bard story, Booker did not have any prejudice against the adventurers. Instead, he had a good impression of them. He thought for a moment and took the parcel from the guard. "His Eminence is about to say something. I'll bring it to him. Tell him to wait outside." Booker walked around and made sure the guards were all right. Before he left, he turned to look at the entrance. His eyes lingered on the figure of the adventurer for a moment, then he turned and walked into the monastery. That face looks familiar. After taking a few steps, Booker felt that he had seen that face somewhere before, but he could not see it clearly because he was too far away, so he did not think much about it. He shook his head and left the church. The afternoon sun was slightly warm. In the open space behind the church, the priests, friars, and nuns of the monastery gathered, listening to Bishop Benjamin's arrangements for the governor's arrival in the middle of the month. The speech in the city square will be held on the 20th of September. His Eminence has sent us accurate information, so please pay attention during this period. In general, it was some simple arrangements. The reason why they chose to hold the meeting at the back of the church instead of going to the church was that these matters were not too important and only needed a few words of advice. When he was done, he looked at Booker, who was carrying a parcel, and waved his hand to dismiss the meeting. "What is this?" Booker's eyes widened in surprise. "There's an adventurer outside saying that he wants to give something to you. I think you gave him a necklace as a keepsake the last time he came. I think this might be important, so I brought it to you. The adventurer is still waiting at the entrance of the monastery." Booker's casual words caused Bishop Benjamin to pause for a moment. He glanced to the side without batting an eyelid. Sally was talking to Chris, so she didn't notice what was going on. Oh, I remember him. He took the package from Booker and found a letter. He opened the letter and frowned for a moment after reading it. Nilda would write something like this, he muttered to himself. Before Booker could say anything, the usually calm bishop turned around and hurried into the church. Booker thought that the bishop was busy, so he did not notice anything unusual. At this time, although the cultivators had already dispersed, a few fellows who got along well with Boo Koo had yet to leave. Hence, he went over to chat with them as usual. A few minutes later, when Rhine, the brain-dead fan of archers, was comparing who was better at archery between mercenaries and adventurers, Booker remembered what happened at the entrance of the church and interrupted. You said adventurers, Rhine? There's an adventurer outside the abbey. He looks like one of those fellows the bards talk about. Oh? What kind? Is he strong? Ryan and the others immediately became interested, and they couldn't help but raise their voices. Sally, who was about to walk away, heard a few words. She suddenly stopped, walked up to them, and asked, An adventurer wants to see the bishop? Yes, Booker nodded. He seems to have come to the abbey once before. Lord Bishop knows him. Hey, no wonder I thought he looked familiar. He looks like that bard. He's here? Sally was stunned. Her delicate oval-shaped face showed an undisguised joy, but then she thought of something and frowned. It was a good thing that Roddy came to see her, but… Oh no! Sally broke out in a cold sweat. She suddenly realized that she had not told Roddy that she had used Roddy's identity in exchange for the church's forgiveness. Without saying a word, Sally turned around and ran madly to the church. 3 minutes ago, before Sally noticed anything, Bishop Benjamin had already met with Roddy in the room of the church marked Spiritual Home. So, this is a letter signed by Priest Nilda. You found it by accident? It's not really by accident. Here's the thing. Roddy, dressed in a gray robe, read the words written in the mission bar with a serious expression. His words were flawless, because this was the script written by the game itself. The mission itself was indeed related to the fall of the priest, and there were no fabrications. It was the same as last time. Naturally, there would not be any surprises this time. Roddy was full of confidence. He was very sure of this. Raising reputation had to be done at the same time as leveling up. Roddy understood that even if he did not need a new bow and arrows, he would have to do some related missions here sooner or later. Because in his memory, the Rose Cross was definitely a very strong religion. This religion with a wide range of believers had stood strong even after the war. Even in the later stages of the game, when most of the land was lost, the Rose Cross could still preach safely in a limited area. Moreover, they had organized a few sizable crusade armies, and the effect was far better than that bunch of idiotic nobles who only knew how to fight amongst themselves. Don't be fooled by this group of quacks who did not participate in political struggles and only knew how to pray and pray all day long. In fact, Rose Cross had a deep foundation and many resources. When it came to war, they were more ruthless than anyone else. So, he started to build a good relationship with this group of quacks now. It was definitely a long-term and effective investment. Other than buying more equipment with better attributes, if necessary, he could even find some clergy to provide him with a strong buff for a period of time. And if he could reach worship, reputation, and mobilize the Holy War Army, while his mind was filled with fantasies, 2 minutes after the conversation began, Roddy deeply understood what it meant by "dreams are plentiful, but reality is cruel." The content of this letter is very important. I represent the Rose Cross Holy Cathedral to thank you for your help. Bishop Benjamin smiled, his tone sincere and polite. He looked at Roddy and casually changed the topic. So, Captain Roddy, seeing that you have helped Rose Cross so much in the past few days, do you have time to talk to me about something else? The originally harmonious atmosphere instantly froze because of this sentence. Roddy was stunned for a moment. Then, he felt 10,000 motherf asterisk cur whizzing past his chest. What the F asterisk CK? He actually knows my identity? At this moment, Roddy thought that the other party had recognized him. But he immediately denied this possibility. He did not even show his figure on the balcony on the 3rd floor. It was impossible for the other party to know what he looked like. After thinking about it, he immediately thought of the only possibility. Did Sally say it? He squinted his eyes and asked tentatively. Then, Roddy saw Benjamin raise his eyebrows and replied with some surprise, "You have very sharp observation skills, Captain Roddy. I was just about to talk to you about Sally." As for what the bishop said after that, Roddy's brain could not process it. If he did not know that the other party was the Rose Cross bishop and he was still in their church, Roddy would have flipped the table and cursed WQNMLGB. The anger of being betrayed made his whole body tremble. He could not even hear what Benjamin said in his mind. Why? He worked himself to the bone to save Sally, and even risked exposing his identity and offending the Rose Cross sect to help her kill the assassin. Is she a F asterisk king professional betraying her teammate? He clenched his fingers into a fist and put it down. The previously harmless smile on Roddy's face suddenly revealed an undisguised cold aura. To Roddy, he actually did not have many friends. Even comrades like Sodeler, Ruger, and Carter, it was difficult for Roddy to truly confide in them about topics outside of the battle. Technological geeks were lonely, so friendship became more and more precious. Just like how he liked that eccentric little wizard, even if she was an NPC, Roddy would still ignore other people's mockery and cherish that relationship. As for Sally, although he did not think much of her, and even saw her as a bargaining chip that could help him change the tragic ending of the kingdom in the future, Roddy still unknowingly sacrificed a lot for her. He even risked his life many times. Either they did not become friends or they would be friends forever. This was one of the things Roddy knew about friendship. Because of this, when he found out that he was betrayed by a friend, his heart was filled with indescribable anger. Why did she do that? Why? Roddy did not even think that he had fallen into the bishop's trap. As for Benjamin, he naturally understood that he actually owed the other party a favor. According to the bishop's original personality, after understanding the stakes, he would definitely choose to repair his relationship with Roddy, or even rope him into the church and become his disciple, but after that conversation with Sally, Benjamin immediately made up his mind. He could not let Sally and Roddy come into contact again. Sally did not realize it herself, but Benjamin had lived for so long, how could he not see the little girl's feelings for Roddy? The nuns of the Rose Cross could not get married, nor could they have any scandals that involved feelings. Although Benjamin knew that this was cruel to Sally, he firmly believed that there was nothing wrong with what he did, even if he owed Roddy a huge favor. At this point, Roddy had completely misunderstood Sally and would definitely bear a grudge in the future. This was equivalent to cutting off the possibility of their relationship developing, and Benjamin had completely achieved his goal. Benjamin was not interested in understanding the doctrine of freedom of love. Moreover, in his eyes, even if Roddy could kill a few orcs and find clues about Priest Nilda, he was still not someone who could be put on the stage. Chapter 105. If that's the case, then I'll take my leave. After a few awkward words, Roddy did not want to continue. He knew that the other party did not seem to have the intention to burn him at the stake as a heretic, so he simply got up and prepared to leave. Benjamin's expression did not change as he continued to exchange pleasantries. After that, he looked at Roddy, who was walking out of the room with a satisfied expression. After all, he's just a young man who doesn't know the ways of the world. And Roddy, who had successfully completed his mission, was in a terrible mood. In the empty church, his heavy footsteps echoed, and the cold atmosphere made his figure seem unusually bleak. Roddy tried to suppress the anger in his heart, but what he felt was a kind of dull sleepiness. He wanted to save the Lucifron family, save old Duke, save Sally, and planned to kill Francis, but in the end, he ended up like this. His heart was really uncomfortable. Between the empty rows of seats, Roddy took a few deep breaths and stopped walking. His originally energetic body seemed to be filled with lead. He closed his eyes, one hand holding the back of the chair, the other hand suddenly raised, and fiercely pulled the bandage on his shoulder. The electric pain made Roddy frown. He tried to use this method to get rid of the terrible mood that enveloped him, but then he found that this method, which used to work in the past, did not work at this time. After thinking for a long time, he finally understood. In fact, in his heart, Sally was not just a simple bargaining chip. That beautiful smiling figure had long taken root in his heart. Although Roddy did not have other thoughts about her, after going through so many things together, his trust in her had long been far beyond that of others. And because he cared too much about her, at this time, he felt that her betrayal was even more unbearable. Although his mind was in a mess, Roddy still tried to analyze his current situation. Now that his identity had been exposed from the completely hidden state, he may have to face the danger of being discovered by Francis in the future, really troublesome. The pain in his shoulder gradually subsided. Roddy sighed and stepped out of the church, but then came the sound of hurried footsteps behind him. He frowned, but did not look back, and continued to walk forward. When Sally rushed into the church out of breath, the first thing she saw was the back of the leaving figure. She passed through the door and walked through the foyer. The cold stone floor made Sally feel that the situation was much worse than she had imagined. When she arrived behind Roddy, the two of them were already standing in front of the steps leading to the church. Wait a minute! Finally, Sally stopped Roddy. She looked at the familiar back in front, but she felt that there seemed to be something that she could not see. Roddy's cold and detached aura made the sensitive Sally's heart sink little by little. It shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this, she wanted to say something, but noticed that blood was oozing from the shoulder of Roddy's leather armor. This discovery made Sally's heart hurt even more, as if it was pricked by a needle. "You're wound," Roddy stopped, but did not look back. He, who was shrouded in anger, actually wanted to turn around and roar at everything, but at this time, when Sally really appeared, he suddenly felt that it was meaningless to do so. "I don't need your concern." After a long silence, Roddy finally said such a sentence, and then strode out of the monastery. From beginning to end, he did not look back. Not even once did he look at Sally. Sally wanted to say something, but when she opened her mouth, she felt that her throat was very dry, and tears blurred her vision. She even covered her chest with her hands, feeling as if a knife was twisting in her heart. Why did this happen? The crowd blocked their line of sight, and the distance between the two was getting farther and farther. Finally, Roddy's figure was submerged at the end of her sight, but the figure standing in front of the monastery did not leave for a long time. September 8th. Moria Manor was no longer as leisurely as it used to be. On the contrary, it was like a fortress headquarters ready to fight at any time, and the atmosphere was unusually tense. Armed guards could be found everywhere. Every carriage that entered the manor had to undergo strict checks and inspections. The subordinates who hurried into the manor all had gloomy faces, trying their best to integrate the information from Hollier City and report it to the current owner of the manor, Count Francis. Since the failure of the assassination of Sally, Francis had not stepped out of the manor for a long time. The continuous setbacks made him, who had always been proud and arrogant, suffer a great psychological impact, but he was not defeated by the failure. Instead, with a series of his own actions, he forced himself to gradually walk out of the shadow of setback. The temperature gradually dropped, and the manor far away from the city had a slight chill at night. When the sun went down, the fireplace in the main hall was lit up, and the orange light brought some warmth to the cold living room. At this time, sitting in the armchair, the young Earl was staring at the burning red charcoal. This manor was the favorite place of his father, the Dukes of Angmar. Because it was close to Hollier City, and there was a hunting ground behind it, every year after autumn, the old Duke would invite some of the city's nobles to come here for hunting and entertainment. As far as he could remember, the last time he hunted here was 7 years ago. At that time, Francis was just a young boy who had just learned how to ride a horse. He only knew how to run back and forth with his father in the jungle. He remembered the first time he hunted. He shot a few arrows, but he did not even touch a hair of a rabbit. In the end, the knight named Titus deliberately shot a wild rabbit, so that he could catch up and shoot it. Francis remembered that his father laughed very happily at that time. At night, when the nobles were enjoying the game they hunted, the knights all praised the young Francis, saying that if he inherited the duke's title in the future, Ifta's territory would definitely rise to a higher level, and so on and so forth. He had not heard such words for a long time. The light from the fire shone on Francis' face. The face that had matured had long lost its childishness. As he frowned, he seemed to have some of his father's aura back then. But after all, he was a young man who had never walked out of Ifta's territory. At this time, it was still too early to say that he had an aura. If he had one, it was just an aura brought about by his resentment. For the past few days, Francis had been planning how to deal with Sally. The lack of sleep for days had caused him to have dark circles under his eyes, and the slightly swollen eye bags made him look extremely gloomy. So when his subordinate Willie asked to see him at the door, he did not even bother to answer. He just waved his hand and signaled for him to come over, not even willing to look at him. "Master, we have confirmed the intentions of those heretics. They are planning to attack when Viceroy Rubens is giving a speech." "Confirmed? How did you confirm it?" "You confirmed the news just like that, but Rubens doesn't know?" "He doesn't know?" Francis was still half sitting and half lying on the armchair. His voice was low and had a hint of authority that had never been seen before. "Tell me the main points." "Master, there are quite a number of Viper Cross heretics in the city. There might be more than 40 people or even more. Although they tried their best to hide, some of them are easy to identify. I sent someone to follow them, and found that at least 4 teams of people had specially surveyed the city square. They are practicing." Willie reported the information he had received in a low voice. "Although Bishop Rubens's team is on the way, we received news that he still has 2 teams of knights hidden in the dark. These days, the monastery has also transferred a large number of guards from other places. Obviously, they are already prepared. It seems that Rose Cross has already known about this and is planning to wipe out all these heretics in one fell swoop." After finishing these words, Francis did not respond. He only sat there quietly and looked at the fire. He squinted his eyes and thought for a moment. Then he said in a low voice, "This group of scammers, they are really dreaming." After pausing for a moment, he turned his head slightly and asked in a low voice, "So, the other news has been confirmed?" "Count Willie, it has been confirmed that Miss Sally will be in the procession of the cult." As if he had been waiting for this sentence for the past few days, when Willie said this, Francis could not help but let out a sigh of relief. He then sat up from the sunken armchair and continued to ask, "Then, gather everyone." "Yes, master." Willie knelt on one knee, expressing his loyalty and obedience. Francis nodded in satisfaction and said, "Now that we have enough people, what we need to do next is simple." Francis had already thought of the arrangements in his heart, so he began to use a calm tone to explain his plan to his subordinate. Willie, who was kneeling in front of Francis, kept nodding his head in agreement. However, at some point, as if what Francis said was too shocking, Willie suddenly raised his head and shook his head to refute something, but Francis raised his hand to stop him. The two of them argued for a moment, but in the end it was because of Francis's stubbornness that Willie compromised. When he was done, Francis once again let out a sigh of relief and said softly, "There is still time. Make sure everything is ready." Willie nodded his head in agreement. He then remembered something and said, "Count Willie, the people who came back from the border have roughly confirmed the identity of that guy." That guy was like a thorn in Francis's throat. All the failures during this period of time had something to do with that bastard. So when Willie said this, he immediately raised his eyebrows and said, "Speak." "He is the leader of the Norland Village's scouts. His name is Roddy." Willie paused for a moment and continued, "Previously, when our people went to investigate, all the scouts in Norland Village disappeared. They said that they went to the Orc Kingdom. But obviously they were lying. When we investigated the second time, the number of scouts was still there. When we investigated the third time, the leader called Roddy came to Hollier City." Needless to say, Willie obviously had more evidence to prove that Roddy was the one who obstructed Francis's plan. So he stopped talking and waited for the Count's response. "Can you confirm his location now?" "Master, because we have to gather our men, we have sent people to search, but we have not confirmed his whereabouts yet." Might lowered his head and responded. His heart was beating like a drum. Just when he was wondering if he would be scolded, he found that the Earl's reaction was beyond his expectation. Francis looked at the dancing fire and said, "Oh, it's not a big deal. It's good enough that we know who he is. This kind of ant can be squashed to death at any time. Except for some tricks, there is nothing to be worried about. Wait until I take care of all of this. When the time comes, let's not talk about dealing with him alone." Then a trace of ruthlessness appeared in his eyes. "All the scouts related to him, don't even think about escaping." "Yes." Willie nodded and was about to leave. Unexpectedly, Francis turned around slightly and asked after a moment of hesitation, "Is there any news from the ducal palace recently?" "Everything is normal. There is nothing unusual, Master." Willie thought for a moment and added, "But Knight Titus and Knight Wellington are both coming to Hollier City. I don't know why." Francis frowned slightly. Titus and Wellington were the two most trusted knights under his father. In the past, when his father was not sick, these two highly skilled, guardian knights had always been by his father's side. Later, when his father's illness could not get better, they went to their own fief. Now that they suddenly came back, what did it mean? It was almost tax day. They were probably here to pay taxes and visit his father. Chapter 106. 8th of September, Pig's Head Bar. It was evening, the busiest time in the bar, but the difference from the past was that the bard Raphael was not here to tell stories, so the atmosphere in the bar was not as lively as it was a few days ago. The wooden door was pushed open, and a middle-aged man dressed in black walked in. His brown linen robe was not eye-catching, but his wrinkled face had a pair of sharp triangular eyes. When he looked at the people around him, he gave off the feeling of a venomous snake with undisguised coldness. This middle-aged man looked to be around 40 years old. Although he was past his peak, his mental state was at least 1 or 2 times stronger than the people who were drinking. Hook, who was sitting at the bar, felt an invisible pressure when this man glanced at him, and he felt uncomfortable all over. The man did not seem to be interested in drinking, and only walked up to the second floor, as if he was looking for someone. "Impressive guy, Hook, who thought that he had better eyesight than others," commented. But of course, he did not understand that this middle-aged man who walked to a room on the second floor could not be described with just the word impressive. He raised his hand and knocked on the door in a certain rhythm. Someone in the room opened the wooden door, and then respectfully welcomed the middle-aged man in. Lord Gallop. Lord Bishop. Honorifics sounded in the room, and the ones who spoke were the 5 Viper Cross believers dressed as adventurers. The arrogance of these fellows in the past was now completely gone, and the 2-meter-tall brawny man even knelt on one knee to receive the robe that Gallop took off. After carefully putting it away, he waited at the side like the lowliest servant for the next order. Gallop, who was addressed as the bishop, had a natural expression as he walked to the main seat. After his triangular eyes swept across his subordinates, he said calmly, "Sit. Yesterday you sent me a message, saying that there are nobles in Hollier City who are willing to work with us?" His voice was hoarse and not loud, but it was obvious that he was in a superior position. The Bishop of the Viper Cross was far more powerful and ruthless than a dean like Benjamin. "Someone contacted the mole we sent out, but they didn't reveal their identity. They only left a letter, revealing their intentions. Judging from the conditions they promised, they should be a big noble in the city, and their influence isn't small. Just a little bit of information, and they want to use the Viper Cross." Gallop narrowed his eyes, and took the letter from Francis' subordinate, Willie. He scanned through it casually, and then curled his lips. A dark purple light suddenly appeared on his fingertips, and after shredding the parchment into pieces, he said in a low voice, "These nobles, other than infighting, they won't do anything else. The next time we meet these self-righteous cheese, just ignore them." His eyes swept across the subordinates in front of him, and his tone was a mixture of fanaticism and coldness. "For this operation, the Church has sent out all the forces that have been lurking here for the past 10 years. Remember, what we have to do is far more than just exterminating these heretics. So, I will not allow any side issues to arise. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Eminence." The 5 adventurers responded in unison. Gallop nodded in satisfaction and continued to expose the flaws that should be exposed. Let the Rose-Cross bastards think that they have all the information on us. Only then will the operation go smoothly. Rubens will only go to the city square on the 20th, so we... Gallop explained the following arrangements, and his subordinates listened attentively, not daring to slack off. In their eyes, the cold-eyed bishop in front of them was definitely not someone to be trifled with, because he had a nickname within the church, Snake's Tooth. It meant that his character was as sinister as a snake, and his every move was bloody and merciless. In such a sect, promotions did not rely on donations or prayers, but on external attacks. Whether it was against the nobles, against the commoners, against the Rose-Cross, as long as they could profit and attract more believers, the Viper Cross was willing to do anything. To put it bluntly, it was a terrorist organization. And with that as a prerequisite, in order to maintain internal stability, the Viper Cross used a high-pressure policy. They were ruthless to the outside world, and even more ruthless to the inside. Gallop was one of the leaders of such an organization. So far, he had only failed on small missions, but he had never failed on big missions. Therefore, he was currently in the limelight within the church, and if he could successfully complete the next mission, he would be able to successfully enter the core leadership of the Viper Cross. That meant more resources, a higher position, and an almost limitless future. 42-year-old Gallop was at the peak of his powers. He was shrewd and had a ruthless side to him. If he had enough opportunities, he would definitely become an ambitious person. This was something that everyone within the church agreed on. Gallop's superior, Jackad, had high hopes for him, and had even sent a capable subordinate to assist him in this operation. And this capable subordinate was the beautiful woman who had visited the Pig's Head bar some time ago, the priest Akasha. But if one were to look at her now, they would discover a very interesting fact. Compared to the hale and hearty Gallop, this beautiful woman who was staying in a hidden hotel a few kilometers away was in a completely different state. The fireplace in the room was not lit, and there was a chilly atmosphere everywhere. The cheap hotel had simple furniture, and a lone candle was lit on the table. Amidst the flickering light, Akasha, who was wearing a chiffon nightgown, was sitting on a chair, enduring something with a pained expression on her face. If someone who did not know the situation saw this scene, they would probably think that this priest with a voluptuous figure was an exhibitionist with a special fetish. If it was a hot summer day, no one would say anything if she dressed like this in private. But the temperature at this time was high enough for people to wear long sleeves to keep warm. No matter how one looked at it, it was not normal for her to be dressed like this. The room was quiet, and occasionally, the sound of Akasha's uneven breathing could be heard. Although this beautiful priest's figure could make one's blood boil, only when one got closer would one see her tightly furrowed brows, tightly biting lips, and slightly trembling fingers. This scene lasted for about 10 minutes before Akasha, whose eyes were slightly red, took a deep breath. She raised her hand to wipe away the sweat on her forehead, and slightly straightened her body. The originally sexy chiffon nightgown had been soaked in blood at some point in time. The pain from the friction caused Akasha's mouth to twitch, but she seemed to be used to it. She did not show much of an expression, and only silently and quickly treated the wound. She raised her hand and took off her nightgown. After her body was completely exposed to the air, Akasha softly chanted a prayer. Light flashed, and the middle-level recovery spell instantly healed the wound on her back. But because she had to go through this process every day, the healing effect of the divine spell had begun to weaken, and the scar left behind had not completely disappeared. The originally smooth and delicate skin on her back was now scarred, as if she had been whipped. This was one of the punishments that the Viper Cross imposed on the internal members of the sect, the punishment of whipping. The effect of the whipping originated from Elder Gakad's dark curse. Once cast, she would be subjected to this punishment every day for a period of time. The power of the curse ignored the defensive shields, so the victim had to endure the punishment caused by the shadow energy in order to be considered atoned. After failing the previous mission, Akasha should have been subjected to a harsher punishment, but Elder Gakad took good care of her, and only gave her the punishment of whipping. At the same time, he allowed her to participate in Gallup's mission to atone for her crime. If she succeeded, she would be able to go one step further. If she failed, what awaited her was an even more terrifying punishment. And in this regard, Akasha had no room to resist. Oppression, enslavement, exploitation. The Viper Cross rule over their believers was bloody and depraved. Someone like Gallup could be like a fish in water in such a struggle, and a gentlewoman like Akasha would only feel tired and fearful of the painful punishment and the oppressive rule of the sect. Those who could not withstand it would be eliminated, and there was no other way but to die. This was the consensus of all the clergymen in the Viper Cross sect. Most blind believers only saw the bright surface of the sect, and only those who gradually stood out and became the backbone would slowly realize the true nature of the sect. But for those like Akasha who realized the true nature and felt some regret, there was no turning back. They could only grit their teeth and continue under the control of those behind the scenes. The pain in her body gradually disappeared, but the pain in her heart could not be eliminated. Akasha stood up and threw the blood-stained pajamas aside. A few complicated emotions flashed across her pale face. She silently put on a clean undergarment and robe, and her chestnut-colored curly hair was tucked behind her head. Her weak body trembled slightly, but she still propped herself up and sat in front of the study table. She took a few deep breaths, and then took out a letter that she had already written. She stared at the handwriting that she had personally written a few days ago, lost in thought. Is this really the only way left? When Roddy walked into the Pig's Head bar with a haggard expression, he brushed past Gallup, who had just walked out of the door. If it was in the past, he would definitely be curious about this guy with such a high level. But at this time, he was in a terrible mood, and did not even have the interest to raise his head. He walked straight to the bar counter, ordered a glass of expensive rum from Hook, and took a big gulp. He then choked and coughed for 5 minutes. F***ck, cough, 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 cough. The dumbfounded Hook looked at Roddy, and then quickly poured a glass of water for him, and patted the young lad's back across the bar counter. Cough, 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 cough. Hook. I'm really sorry, I'm really not in the mood to tell stories today. Cough, 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 I can tell. What's wrong? You've fallen out of love. Seeing that he was almost fine, Hook sat back down and poured himself a glass of ale. He threw the rag aside, and with a look of experience, he casually said, I should have told you that women are all liars. Let me tell you, when I was young. Chapter 107. It's not what I'm thinking? Sigh, I know you won't feel comfortable saying this, but you just have to bear with the pain. Women. Hook curled his lips and pointed at the rum in Roddy's hand, making a you-know expression. This cup is on me. You'll forget everything when you wake up. Roddy gradually recovered from his choking state. Seeing that Hook had made up his mind about something, he felt helpless. But after such a torment, his originally depressed mood improved a little. At least he could feel that his attention had been diverted and his chest was not as tight as before. After living for so many years, I've encountered many unlucky things. There's nothing I can't overcome. Low EQ also had its benefit. It was difficult to be affected by negative emotions for too long. Moreover, he did not become like this because of any emotional injury. In the end, it was just that he felt uncomfortable being sold. Moreover, today was not without good news. Roddy took a sip of the rum. After the fiery alcohol flowed down his throat, the scenery in front of him seemed to become a little blurry. He softly called out the reputation bar. The word respect on the Rose Cross column impressively appeared. With such a level of reputation, according to the standard of the players, Roddy was also ahead of them. That afternoon, he went to the armory in the city to pick out all the items that he could use. There were two biggest rewards, one of which was the fine composite short bow. Although the level 10 bow only had the green word, excellent, at the beginning, its damage was twice as high as the level 8 short bow that he had created. The speed of the arrow was even faster. It could be said that when he reached level 10 and wielded this bow, it would be enough to threaten some low-level advanced professions. Under certain conditions, it could even kill advanced professions that were within level 5 and below. Apart from this bow, Roddy was pleasantly surprised to find that the armory actually opened up a rare item with a refresh time limit. In the past, such items would only appear when he bought it for the first time. After that, it would only appear once every few months or even half a year. As the only player in this world, it was reasonable for Roddy to purchase a rare item in the year 588. And what made Roddy excited was that he bought 4 calibrated arrows and 1 explosive arrow. Those who did not understand archery would not know the importance of an arrow. Most of them only thought that a good bow was enough. However, experts like Natha, who relied on archery to make a living, felt admiration for Roddy after seeing the 2 arrows. Not only was the performance of an excellent arrow stable, the speed and power of the arrow were also much stronger than ordinary arrows. It even had the effect of armor penetration and magic penetration. In the past, the arrows that Roddy used were all shoddily made by small workshops at the border. Every time he used it, he had to specially reprocess and calibrate it to barely maintain the accuracy. As for the power, if it was not for his good archery skills, the lethality of such arrows was actually quite limited. Although the new arrows were frighteningly expensive, if compared to the arrows that Roddy originally used, it was definitely worth the money. As for the rare explosive arrow marked with the word blue, which was worth the price of 4 calibrated arrows, it could even make Roddy pose a threat to advanced professions in one shot. If the average damage of the previous arrows was around 80, then after changing to the new set of bow and arrows, Roddy's average damage could soar to more than 200. If he changed to explosive arrow, even if it was not a critical hit, The normal damage could still be more than 400. This could definitely be called changing a shotgun to a cannon. Not only was his equipment upgraded, after completing the Fall of the Priestess of Nilda mission, his experience points could already be upgraded to level 10. He still had about 78,000 points left, which was about 20% away from level 11. For Roddy, who currently had difficulty drawing a bow due to his shoulder injury, directly leveling up at this time to recover his HP was totally worth considering. Thinking of this, Roddy's mood improved a lot. He quickly sorted out his thoughts and thought about the only thing he had to do next: kill Francis. After killing him, he and the scouts of Norland Village would no longer be threatened by anything. By then, he could directly go far away, no longer be threatened by that annoying bishop, and no longer have to see the face of that duke's daughter. He had no interest at all. Now that the Dukes of Angmar had awakened, how that old man dealt with his son was his own business. If he wanted to kill Francis, no one could stop him. However, when he thought of the advanced professions, those thoughts about the IMBA profession surfaced at this time. While he was thinking, Hook, who was in front of him, waved his hand in front of him and asked, "What are you thinking about? Your alcohol tolerance is too low. You're already drunk?" "Oh, I'm thinking about something." "What are you thinking about?" "There are women everywhere. I can find another one at any time. Look, I think the daughter of the Hanson family across the street is not bad." Roddy rubbed between his eyebrows. He really did not expect the bearded Hook to have such thoughts. He coughed twice and wanted to refuse, but as if he thought of something, he changed his tone and said in a low voice, "Actually, I have a girlfriend." When he said this, he could feel his face was a little flustered, but in order to stop Hook from being so nosy, Roddy bit the bullet and continued to say, "But she's not in Ifurta's territory. Bards are all very romantic. Who knows which one you're talking about?" Hook twitched his mouth, raised his glass and asked while drinking, "Oh, does she live very far away?" "From here to the southeast, about more than 1,000 kilometers. Pfft! Hook choked on a mouthful of beer and almost spat out all the ale he had just drunk. In the eyes of modern people, such a distance was not far. It was only a matter of a few hours by high-speed rail. Even if it was a car, it could be reached in a day and a night. But in this extremely primitive medieval society, such a distance sounded like a natural moat. In other words, more than 99% of the people in Hollier City would never have the chance to go to such a faraway place in their lifetime. In the human world where forests surrounded the city, travel was not a romantic word at all. The dangers contained in the forests along the way were enough to make most people flinch. Therefore, to Roddy's answer, Hook immediately felt that it was extremely ridiculous. He almost choked on his beer, and when he recovered, he panted and said, "This joke is not funny." Roddy bowed his head and coughed twice. Hook naturally did not know that the girlfriend he mentioned did not actually know him at all. Quietly holding the rum, Roddy was a little lost in thought about the little wizard in his memory. After a long while, he sighed. Although he wanted to go find her, the distance was indeed too far, and there were many dangerous areas in between that he could not go through right now. Perhaps there would only be hope when he advanced to the profession level of 20? Hook saw that he was in a daze, so he did not say anything more and turned to chat with the others who came to buy beer. Time passed like this, and not long after, the 5 adventurers came down to eat. Roddy and the adventurers had been seeing each other frequently for a few days, so they could be considered as acquaintances. He nodded as a greeting. The adventurers often listened to his stories, so at this time, they also nodded in a friendly manner in response. Then, they sat at a table on the side and ate. Roddy turned around to find Hook to pour a glass of water, but when he looked up, he found that Hook was staring into the distance. "What's wrong?" "Humph, it's Francis' men again. These days they have been wandering around this area." Hook squinted his eyes, as if he did not like the guy who just entered the door. Some time ago, He asked me to be on the lookout for scouts with bows and arrows. He came over every day and asked me about this and that. It was so annoying. Now, he came into my tavern and talked to the customers without greeting me. These people are really getting more and more unruly. Because they had become familiar with each other these days, Hook did not speak as cautiously as before. Of course, he would not know that the scout with bows and arrows was in front of him at this time, looking at him with a strange look. However, Roddy did not think that there was any possibility of him being exposed. He was just wondering. Francis failed to assassinate Sally, so now he sent people to seek help from the archenemy of Rose Cross? Could it be that he was planning to let them assassinate Sally? Directly attack the monastery? At this point, Roddy thought of today's encounter again, and his mood suddenly became cold. Do what you want, I can't be bothered. Who cares what he wants to do? I'm not interested. Hook was also bored, so he casually said, I heard that around the 15th, there will be a governor coming to Hollier. Hey, I think my business will be better then. Roddy caught the message and suddenly tilted his head, pretending to ask casually, Oh? Why? Every time such a character comes to Hollier, the monastery will be mobilized. The nuns and priests will all go to the square to perform some kind of ritual. Following that, a group of believers from other places will also come. Many of those people can't afford to stay in big hotels, so they will come to stay at my place. Speaking of which, if you continue to stay here and tell a few more stories, my business here will probably be even better. Hook was immersed in the beautiful fantasy and did not notice Roddy's increasingly deep gaze. He took the new ale and asked, Will Count Francis also attend the event? All the nobles will be there, but I don't know if old Duke Ongmar will be there this year. 3 years ago, he seemed to have declined due to illness. It should be quite lively, right? Yup, every time. Roddy maintained the appropriate interest and chatted with Hook without leaving any loopholes, but his eyes noticed that Francis' subordinate chatted with a few Rose Cross believers for a while and then left. It seemed like they parted on bad terms. Chapter 108. Although Roddy was annoyed by the bad luck of betraying his teammates, it was not enough to put him in danger of losing his life. So what if he was depressed? But he still had to move on. He always had this mentality. So when he returned to his room after drinking, Roddy had almost completely gotten rid of the negative emotions. Men, especially otakus with low EQ and little experience in relationships, would find it difficult to be unreasonable for more than a night. Roddy's mind was filled with the concept of pragmatism. The first thing he did when he returned to the house was to open the experience bar and prepare to level up. Looking at the ring on his hand, Roddy remembered the rumors about the advanced profession quest item. In the end, he decided to take it off. Because if there was a 1 in 10,000 chance of triggering the quest, it would usually cause the equipment to be bound. That was to say, even if the equipment was taken off and given to someone else, it would no longer have its original function. If it could really advance to the Guardian of Light, this profession was not suitable for him at all. Roddy did not want to be a melee healer or something like that. He looked around and made sure that the doors and windows were closed. He glanced at the equipment bar. In addition to another ring, there was only the white necklace with the stealth skill. He raised his hand and wanted to take off the necklace, but then he felt that he seemed to be oversensitive. The IMBA profession was just a guess. Whether the ring was reliable or not was another matter. Why did he make it seem like he would win the lottery at any time? He chuckled to himself. Dispelling the messy thoughts from his mind, he raised his hand and pointed at the air. Level up! Crack! Suddenly, he heard the sound of glass shattering. Roddy was stunned for a moment. He raised his hand and looked around. For a moment, he did not know what happened. He said to himself, What happened? The pain in his shoulder disappeared, the wound healed, and the bruise on his chest immediately improved. This was normal. After all, he did not think that he would emit a golden light or transform. But the crisp sound was very abnormal. He raised his hand to touch his chest, only to find that the necklace seemed to be gone. When this thought emerged in his mind, a strange feeling suddenly invaded his whole body. A numbing sensation spread through every inch of his skin and bones, followed by a bone-chilling coldness. Roddy felt as though he was sinking into an icy river. He staggered a few steps before losing control of his body and directly falling onto the bed. He wanted to reach for the wooden plank next to him to stand up, but found that even opening his mouth had become extremely difficult. The scenery in front of him began to become slightly blurry, as though he had suddenly become myopic. His ears were buzzing, his body had lost its sense of touch, and the old smell of the inn had also disappeared. He had lost his five senses. In his consciousness, a chaotic scene flashed before his eyes. Forests, rocks, deserts, giant running creatures. All kinds of roars resounded in his mind, and the sound waves brought with them an unprecedented and terrifying momentum. Colors, elements, manic chatter, elvish language, and an explosion of information emerged in his mind. As if 10,000 years had passed, when Roddy thought that he was about to lose himself in this dizzying illusion, the world seemed to have returned to normal in an instant. His vision suddenly recovered when it was about to turn dark, the buzzing in his ears disappeared, and the numbing sensation in his body abruptly receded. Roddy suddenly opened his mouth, like a person who had been rescued from drowning. The feeling of being on the verge of death was too frightening, so much so that he still did not understand what had happened until now. Suddenly sitting up, Roddy panted, and cold sweat slid down his forehead. He clenched his fist and looked around, then gradually frowned. The scenery in front of him seemed to have changed a little. Raising his hand, Roddy stared at his palm. At first glance, there seemed to be no difference, but after a moment of concentration, he realized that he could actually clearly see the pores on his palm. When he raised his head and looked forward, the spider web in the corner of the room and the spider that was weaving a web on it were clearly visible. He could even clearly count the number of eyes on the body of the spider that was the size of a fingernail. What's going on? The sounds that he could hear had also changed. He could faintly hear the inexplicable sounds of conversation. Roddy held his breath slightly, and realized that he was hearing the voices of the heretics next door that were deliberately lowered. Lord Gallop's plan is almost finalized. Rubens's team has a lot of people, but if we carry out a surprise attack in the square, they will definitely not be able to cover all of them. They have prepared a lot of holy knights. There are 3 routes that we can choose when we retreat, and one of them has been prepared for half a year. It's just beside the West City Gate. The intermittent voices were extremely clear in Roddy's ears. Roddy was very sure that he could not hear such voices before. He clenched his fingers, and an unfamiliar power flowed through his body. He had a ridiculous feeling. It was as if he was Peter Parker from Spider-Man. Parker. It's just leveling up, it's not like I was bitten by a mutated spider. Roddy was completely dumbfounded. He frowned and turned his gaze back to the character attribute pane, but then he was completely stunned on the spot. The advanced class talent pane, combat stance pane, basic class talent pane, skill rune embedding, advanced skill pane, and several other large boxes were flashing with notifications. It can't be. Reaching out to touch his chest again, Roddy could not help but mutter to himself, what the F***CK is going on? 9th of September. On the second day after Roddy left the monastery, the curfew that had been in place for the past few days was finally lifted, and the believers could enter the church for worship. The nuns and monks, as usual, would pray in the morning before leaving the church. A few priests would be there to answer the believers' questions, and occasionally cast 1 or 2 divine spells to treat the sick. The news that the governor was about to arrive at the monastery had already spread, so the believers had been donating more than usual. The ending of the curfew was also to reduce this loss. Bishop Benjamin was confident that nothing big would happen during this period of time, so he was naturally happy to enjoy it. But if there was anything that made him uncomfortable, it would probably be Sally's sudden change in attitude today. Obviously, she had found out that he had purposely made Roddy misunderstand her yesterday. But he did not mind at all. "You're still young, wait for a few years. You'll know that I'm doing this for your own good." He sighed in his heart. He knew that young children would always have a few years of rebelliousness. It was her business if Sally was cold to him. He just had to do what he had to do. Moreover, the letter that Bishop Rubens sent this morning had already informed him of the impending attack by the Viper Cross heretics, so he had to be busy deploying the guards for the next few days, and had no time to talk to Sally about anything else. According to the plan, after this incident was over, he would be promoted to the district archbishop, and Sally would officially become a priest. Oh, I really hope that when Rubens comes to the monastery in a few days, she can behave better. Bishop Benjamin shook his head, thinking about how to reply to the letter. Although he did not take Roddy seriously because of his experience, but in reality, his actions had indeed made Sally angry. She was originally well-mannered, but her transformation in a day's time had shocked her companions. The cold expression that kept strangers away, the silent and clenched fists. Crazy and the others worriedly went to ask, but Sally only shook her head and said that it was nothing, and then walked away with a frown. It was not until noon that her tense face finally relaxed a little, because Sally had finally reconnected with Martin again. At this time, Martin still did not know what had happened yesterday, and was still reporting about the information he had gathered. "Francis has gathered all his men, and seems to be preparing for a big move. I'm going to investigate." He still wanted to say something, but he found that Sally raised her hand and interrupted him. "Don't worry about them, the 2 mercenary teams I previously found are now fully activated, double their salaries, and secretly find another team. Wait for the 20th in the city square to directly attack him, don't hesitate." "Yes. Yes, Mississippi." Martin was startled by Sally's scary expression, and he answered with a stutter. He had never seen this duke's daughter in such a state. Her cold and emotionless words made him shudder. "Also, find the bard that Book mentioned, and give him this letter." Sally lowered her eyes, took out a letter, and gave it to Martin along with something else. She seemed to be suppressing some emotions, took a deep breath, and continued. "This is the token, just give it to him. That's all." "Yes, Mississippi. Well, be careful not to be followed. We don't have much time left." After seeing Martin off, Sally's lonely figure stood in front of the monastery's gate. The September breeze blew past, and the hem of her robe swayed slightly. The girl with slightly red eyes raised her head and looked at the azure sky. She blinked her eyes and suppressed some emotions. Her slender and fair fingers stretched out, clenched into fists several times, and then loosened again. She never thought that she would stay up all night because of the guilt and regret in her heart. Ever since she was a child, she had never regretted something so much. When she thought that she might lose contact with that guy, or even never see him again, the unprecedented panic made it difficult for her to breathe. However, she did not give up completely, and immediately chose to remedy the situation. Whether it was useful or not, Sally had to do it. No matter what Roddy decided, she hoped to explain it to Roddy face to face. Even if he decided to leave, she did not want him to leave with a misunderstanding about her. She looked at the corner of the street in the distance for the last time, and as expected, she did not see the figure in her heart. Sally sighed, turned around, and returned to the church. But after a few steps, she stopped again. She frowned slightly, revealing a doubtful expression. She turned her head and looked again, as though she saw the shadow of someone she had not seen for a long time. But after looking for a long time, she was sure that her eyes were playing tricks on her. Sighing in disappointment, Sally walked into the depths of the church. Chapter 109. The 14th of September. Norland Village. It had been 6 days since Roddy stormed out of the cloister, and nearly half a month had passed since he left Norland Village. For Roddy, who had reached level 10, his life had undergone a crucial change. On the other hand, at the edge of Ifta's territory, the quiet Norland Village was still the same as before, maintaining its unique tranquil atmosphere. Herdsmen were herding sheep back from afar. As it was almost time for the new harvest, the farmers had begun to prepare for the autumn harvest. At this time, they had harvested the newly grown oat. After packing them in bags, some of them were left in the village for the scouts' warhorses to eat, and the rest were given to Steward Anderson to offset the taxes. Roddy's departure did not bring about any changes here, which was also the effect he wanted to achieve. At this time, many people in the village did not even know that their leader had gone to Hollier. In their eyes, the scouts were busy all day, running here and there. No one would notice that 1 or 2 faces were missing. At noon, the resting farmers looked at the scouts training in the distance by the low wall. They called out from time to time. Auntie Susan and a few children brought cold water from the well, waiting for a while to quench the thirst of the scouts who had finished their training. A few months ago, the scouts were so lazy that they could only eat. Now they had undergone earth-shattering changes. The villagers' attitude towards them had changed 180 degrees. It was not only because of the great change in the scouts' spirit and appearance, but also because of the accident that happened a few days ago. Around the 12th of September, the village was attacked by the Whistling Horse. In this day and age, the Whistling Horse sounded noble, but to put it bluntly, it was actually hard work. The name of the great prairie rattling horse had disappeared into the wind many years ago. The Kowloon Kingdom had been developing quite well in recent years, and the year was good. Sometimes it was better to be a farmer than a bandit. Therefore, there were far fewer rattling horses than there were a few decades ago. The ones who were still working hard were mostly those who had been oppressed by their lords. Although there weren't many of them, they were capable of doing anything. When a man was hungry, he was more ferocious than a wolf. Therefore, even a dozen of haggard bandits on skinny horses could cause unimaginable harm to the village. However, when the bandits rushed into the village with their swords, they probably did not expect what they would encounter. What exactly happened that day, the timid villagers who hid in their houses did not see clearly. In any case, when they realized that the battle was over, they only saw the ground covered in broken and shapeless corpses of the rattlesnakes and 29 fully armed scouts whistling past. From that day on, the villagers' attitude towards the scouts completely changed. At this moment, the villagers were curiously watching as the scouts changed their formation. Within 10 seconds of sprinting, the 15 scouts changed from a disorderly formation to a wedge-shaped formation. They then rushed past 7 to 8 rows of scarecrows. Their long swords danced in the air, and the ground was littered with dummies that had been cut into several pieces. The villagers cheered loudly for their superb combat skills, and there was even a sparse round of applause. "Everyone, take a break." After the last few drills, Sodeler gave the order to rest and reorganize. The sweating soldiers dismounted from their horses and took the water and towels handed to them by the villagers, talking and laughing. Carter, on the other hand, livened up the atmosphere. With a few words, he began to get the people gathered together to start a singing competition. It was quite a show of unity between soldiers and civilians. This was also the task that Roddy had arranged for him. Will the afternoon training still be the same as yesterday's? On the other side, Ruger put the short bow on his back to the side and asked Sodeler after wiping his sweat. "No, there are some changes. The training plan that Roddy left behind said that there will be changes starting today. The battle against infantry is almost done, but there is still a lot of room for improvement in the battle between cavalry and cavalry." Sodeler flipped through the parchment in his hand. "The round shields that Dick and Stan helped make these days are almost ready. After they are equipped tomorrow, we can start the cavalry battle practice. But Roddy stressed that. The two sat on the side and discussed some technical problems. It was obvious that they had a tacit understanding and reached an agreement without much nonsense. Not long after, Sodeler asked Dick to bring the wooden round shields wrapped in iron and explained to the group of scouts how to use them after they were equipped. However, before the afternoon training could begin, an urgent letter from Hollier City made Sodeler change the training arrangements. In this era, the fastest way of communication was through pigeons. However, pigeons were difficult to popularize. In a small place like Norland Village, there were no pigeon houses for civilians to use, and the pigeons in the Lord's manor were used for food. So in the end, they could only rely on the most primitive messengers to deliver letters. In most cases, only the king and nobles had professional messengers to deliver messages. However, Hollier was the #1 city in Iferta, so it still had messengers for civilians and merchants to deliver messages. Even so, it took 5 days for the message from Hollier to reach Sodeler. Level 1 alert. Everyone, prepare for battle. Sodeler took the letter from Roddy. After confirming that the handwriting and wax seal were correct, he immediately issued an order. Everyone, equip your weapons and armor. Bring your shields and prepare your horses. We will depart in 10 minutes. The scouts immediately got to work. The curious villagers did not know what was going on. They only felt that when these young people were serious, they had a different kind of aura. This aura seemed to be much more powerful than those arrogant knights. At the same time, in Hollier, Viceroy Rubens's convoy was slowly driving into the city. The people on both sides of the road sensed that this convoy was different. Those who were slightly better informed knew what it meant. At first, the ordinary people just looked around. But soon, the devout believers who received the news immediately surrounded some of the main road. If not for the 2 teams of holy knights on big horses opening the way for the convoy, it would have taken the Viceroy's convoy several hours to reach the monastery. The believers shouted slogans and crawled on the road where the carriages passed by. They even kissed the dirty ruts left by the carriages. In an era where information was not developed, the power brought by religion was often so astonishing. People yearned for the power of God to protect them, so they gave up their faith. There were all kinds of people in the crowd. There were believers, commoners, city guards who maintained order, gentry, nobles, guild members of various professions, and so on. Among them, naturally, no one noticed a middle-aged man in tattered clothes who looked like a vagrant. He was wearing a tattered robe that reeked of sweat. Roddy no longer sang and told stories with the Vielian. Instead, he completely abandoned his identity as a wandering poet and disguised himself as the Vielian, lurking in the city. After being pointed out by Bishop Benjamin, although he had some doubts about his reputation in the Rose Cross, he also understood that continuing to use the identity of a bard was not a wise move. So on the 10th of September, he said goodbye to Boss Hookah's Pig's Head Bar and stayed in another inconspicuous inn. Every day, he spent some time walking around the city to record information. Most of the time, he went outside the city to adapt to the new arrows and short bow. Francis was still holed up in Moria Manor, so Roddy had put all his hopes on the speech he would definitely attend on the 20th in the city square. And for this, he had been doing a lot of preparation. Other than calling Sodeler and all the scouts over, the most he did was to adapt to the new weapon in his hand as soon as possible. Although Roddy's archery skills were outstanding, he could not immediately adapt to and adjust to the subtle differences between the bow and the arrows. So he dared not be careless in this kind of thing. To be able to walk at the forefront of all the players, it was not purely based on ruthlessness and talent. More importantly, it was a cautious, steady, and meticulous mind, as well as a perseverance that ordinary people could not achieve. In 6 days, Roddy had completely adapted to the short bow. Today, when he learned that the Viceroy's team had entered the city, he immediately rushed over. Because of his sloppy appearance, some believers would occasionally treat him as a beggar, even waving their hands to give him some copper coins, and Roddy would bow and thank them like a real vagrant. He was like a precise machine, and his state was almost no different from when he was at his peak in the game. He was focused, abandoned all distracting thoughts, and did everything with a strong sense of purpose and direction. Under the disguise of his tattered robe, Roddy watched the Viceroy's team disappear at the corner of the street. The crisp sound of the Templar Knight's horse hooves hitting the road was covered by the noise of the crowd. He carefully counted the number of people and calculated the combat power of the entire team. In the noisy noise, the whispers were almost undetectable. 24 Templar Knights. Miscellaneous soldiers, miscellaneous soldiers, miscellaneous soldiers. 4 priests. About level 5. The pedestrians on the street jostled each other, and Roddy was among them. His ears were filled with countless blessings, sighs, and conversations. In a few minutes, all of this gradually disappeared as the team disappeared at the corner of the street. Standing on the spot and combing through the information he had just received, Roddy glanced at his battle stance bar. His expression gradually returned to its usual indifference, and he turned around and disappeared at the corner of the street. Speaking of which, Roddy's strength had improved by leaps and bounds. This was because he had obtained a true IMBA advanced profession, Witcher. This feeling was like casually buying a lottery ticket and winning $5 million. Even though 6 days had passed, Roddy still felt a little unbelievable in his heart. The moment he clicked to upgrade, the mysterious necklace on Roddy's chest completely shattered. The crisp crack was the sound of the necklace self-destructing. When he realized that his body had changed, his character attribute bar had an additional advanced profession bar of Witcher. Roddy never imagined that he would encounter a situation that was completely different from the game. However, whenever he opened the character attribute bar, next to Army Soldier, level 10, it would clearly say Witcher, level 0. Witcher, this was a profession that Roddy had only heard of on the official forum. The only thing he knew about it was that because it was too powerful, it was cut and split into several professions. One of them was the Ranger, that Roddy used to have the highest level. Chapter 110. However, strictly speaking, the Witcher was displayed as level 0, which meant that he had yet to completely obtain this profession. Roddy knew that he had to complete a series of advanced profession quests before he could truly obtain the inheritance of this profession. And now, he could even choose to give up on this profession. In other words, if Roddy was willing, he could delete this advanced profession quests from the quest pane and choose to look for another mentor. However, even a fool knew that he could not give up on such an opportunity. He was filled with anticipation for this Witcher that he had obtained as if he had won the lottery. However, the advanced profession quests displayed on the quest pane made him frown. Arena? Arena! An Inquisitor? Hlapuer Falnuan Arlant? Essiriarelli Elo Iama Quindinieraniel Elianoni. This pile of words was very strange. At first glance, Roddy thought it was garbled code caused by a bug in the program. However, there was a bracket at the bottom which read, "Clue, go to the Silent Forest to take a look." Seeing the words Silent Forest, Roddy turned around and observed the words again. He felt that the roots of some of the words were somewhat similar to the Elven language. This feeling was similar to learning English and then looking at German. Although it was not the same language, some of the words were spelled in a similar way. However, in terms of understanding it, Roddy could not understand it at all. For example, the German word kitchen was Kusch, while the English word was kitchen. It sounded similar, but if one had never learned it, they would be completely at a loss. Therefore, regarding the subsequent steps of this advanced profession quests, Roddy could only wait until he went to the Silent Forest to research. However, even though it was a level 0 advanced profession, Roddy's current strength still had a qualitative leap. This was because all advanced professions, upon triggering or finding a mentor, would obtain 3 basic skills related to the profession to assist in the completion of the advanced profession quests. He clicked on the skill bar. Due to the destruction of the mysterious necklace, the original Stealth, level 3, skill had disappeared. In its place were 3 new skills. Stealth, level 1, consumes 10 stamina. Requires the user to stop all movements and gradually blend into the surroundings to reduce the chances of being seen through by enemies. Lasts for 30 seconds. Cooldown, 1 minute. Concentration shooting, level 1. Consumes 50 MP to activate, increases the damage of a single shot. Casting time is 2 to 6 seconds. Provides a 10% damage bonus for 6 seconds. Cooldown, 1 minute. After 6 seconds, the damage bonus is calculated as 10%. Prancing, level 1, energy consumption. 15 jump in any direction, 1 to 4 meters away. Instant activation. Cooldown, 15 seconds. Roddy had already familiarized himself with these 3 skills over the past few days. Stealth seemed to be a weaker version of Stealth, but after trying it out, he realized that such a skill was far more practical than the level 3 Stealth skill when used from a distance. As for focus shooting, Roddy couldn't be more familiar with it because it was a basic skill of a ranger. However, the focus shooting skill he was familiar with had a fixed damage value as the level increased. For example, when he was at level 1, he could focus 50 points of damage for 6 seconds. But now, this skill increased the damage proportionally. Speaking of which, this seemed to be incomparable to the Ranger version of the buff, but Roddy understood the potential of this skill. A skill that increased the damage by percentage, when the critical hit or basic damage reached a certain level, was actually far more powerful than a fixed damage bonus. As for the use of prancing, it was a necessary skill to kill and rob people. It seemed to be no different from the prancing skill of a ranger. From the basic skills, Witcher seemed to be only slightly stronger than ranger. However, he did not immediately make a conclusion, because he had never seen a setting that made him look forward to it. In his status bar, other than HP, there were 2 more bars: energy and mana. There was no difference between the vitality and the ranger profession. The maximum value was 100. In the absence of talent bonuses, 5 points would be recovered every 3 seconds. Roddy was very familiar with this. However, what was the meaning of the mana that was written in the empty space of 0/0? Rangers didn't need any magic power. Putting this question aside for the time being, the level 1 environment acuity on the battle stance bar was what made Roddy feel strange. Battle stance had a total of 3 bars. Advanced professions could have a new stance every 5 levels. During a battle, they could choose 3 of them to adapt to the current battle. This battle stance was the root cause of the gap between advanced professions and basic professions to a large extent. When all 3 battle stances were activated, if he went offline, his damage output would be 5 times higher than if he did not activate battle stance. Now that he had activated environmental acuity, the seemingly insignificant battle stance, it was definitely a great help to a long-range assassin like Roddy. The first Ranger combat stance bar was stamina. After lighting it up, the stamina recovery speed increased from 5 points every 3 seconds to 6 points. In comparison, Roddy still preferred the environment acuity stance. Apart from these differences, because he had not completed the Advanced Profession mission, the Advanced Profession talent bar was not activated. He did not know what was in it, so he could not make more conclusions about this profession. However, what was certain was that in terms of type, there should be a lot of overlap with Ranger. In addition to this, the basic profession talent bar should be the only thing that should be expected. This was the talent of Legion Soldier. It was divided into weapon mastery, defense skills, and body enhancement. Every increase in level would give an enhancement point. At the maximum level of 25, there would be a total of 16 points. Roddy directly put the first talent point on the agility enhancement under the body enhancement category. The effect was a permanent 5% increase in agility attribute. Advanced profession skills, combat stance bar, and basic profession talent bar, in addition to the attribute changes brought by leveling up, were the guarantee that Roddy's strength had made a huge leap. All of these made Roddy very confident in assassinating Francis. So at this moment, he still felt a little relaxed. Looking up at the sky, he walked to the bread shop hungry. He bought the cheapest black bread with 1 copper coin, thanked the shopkeeper, and walked to the hotel where he stayed in Cambay district while chewing on the bread. But coincidentally, he happened to pass by the entrance of the Pig's Head bar on the way. Roddy was very confident in his disguise, so he did not worry that anyone in the bar would recognize him. So he did not bother to take a detour. Chewing on the bread, he was ready to go straight through the bar. However, when he passed by the entrance of the bar, the wooden door was pushed open. A few people walked out, which made him raise his eyebrows. The first to walk out was a woman of average height. She was wearing a veil and a coarse hemp robe. She was no different from an ordinary civilian, but her eyes were very bright, and her body was curvy. But the reason why Roddy stopped was not because of her good figure, but because her level was much higher than his. Why do I keep running into these kinds of people recently? Roddy raised his eyebrows when he saw the 3 or 4 people following behind the other party. His sensitive environment state allowed him to clearly hear their whispers. The foreign accent immediately reminded him of the members of the Viper Cross that lived in the tavern. Without a doubt, they were his accomplices. But now, Roddy did not have much of a good impression of the Rose Cross. After confirming such information, he felt that it was meaningless. He walked past the woman and continued to walk further away. However, Hook's unique loud voice came from behind the wooden door that was not closed, which made him stop again. "You are looking for that bard? He checked out 3 days ago, saying that he was going to continue north. If you are interested in going to Gigtown, you might run into him." The bar was noisy, and the wooden door closed quickly, so Roddy did not hear what the person said. But Hook's voice was abnormally clear. "I really don't know where he went. It's useless for you to come here these few days. I told you that he left long ago, but you just don't believe me." What followed after was some nonsense, but Roddy felt that it was a little strange. He found a corner and sat down. He lowered his head to let the tattered hood cover his face, and continued to nibble on his bread, as if nothing had happened. Not long after, a middle-aged man walked out of the bar. Roddy called out the surrounding character status bar. Seeing that the person's level was not higher than his, he slightly narrowed his eyes. The middle-aged man looked depressed, obviously a little discouraged because he could not find Roddy. He muttered, "It's really hard to explain." Then he turned and walked along the narrow street. Roddy looked at the direction in which the other party was heading and had a plan in mind. He immediately got up and slowly moved to the back of the bar. After that, he nimbly jumped over a high wall and hid in the shadows of the dark alley. He then activated the concealment spell, and his body almost immediately merged with the dark mud wall behind him. Then, the middle-aged man turned into this alley and walked past Roddy without noticing. When he suddenly heard something behind him, Roddy had already chopped the back of the man's neck. Bang! Roddy was already familiar with this kind of sneak attack. He dragged the unconscious man to the side and carefully searched everything on him: copper and silver coins, keys that he carried with him, parchment, a dagger, letters, and something. Roddy frowned and looked at the thing in his hand. It was a die. The bone die had a warm luster, and it was obvious that it was often played with. The unknown symbols on it obviously belonged to an orc. Roddy was stunned for a moment, and then he remembered that the die in his hand was one of the ones he gave to Sally. Thinking of this, he felt a knot in his chest. Why did this thing appear here? What does it mean? After flipping open the letter, Roddy suddenly froze. He did not even pay attention to Martin, who was beside him. He immediately stood in the dark alley and carefully read every line on the parchment. The content was not long, but Roddy read it for a full 5 to 6 minutes, repeatedly reading it 3 times. When he moved his gaze away from the letter, he closed his eyes and stretched out his hand to rub the space between his eyebrows. His cold and expressionless face actually showed a hint of shame. He then slowly exhaled and cursed in a low voice, "So it's that old man. How could I forget about this relationship?" In this letter, Sally did not say any other nonsense. She only used the simplest words to describe what she did in the monastery. It was just a simple narration, without any extra emotions mixed in. Although it was obvious that she wanted to save their friendship, the girl's modesty prevented her from begging. As for the hidden feelings in her heart, Roddy could not detect it. But from this letter, he found the answers to many questions that had been puzzling him for a long time. The reason why Francis did not find trouble with him was almost all because of Sally. If it were not for her, he would have been surrounded by Francis's men the moment he returned from the Orc Kingdom. And the reason why the reputation of the Rose Cross rose so much out of nowhere, he now had the answer. He was still wondering why Benjamin did not directly drag him to the stake. It turned out that it was all because of Sally. Behind all these things, the girl who was trapped in the monastery and had extremely limited resources had done so many things unknowingly. And Roddy found that he directly regarded Sally as a useless teammate, just because of the words of a bishop he did not know. Chapter 111. At the same time Roddy left, in a private room on the second floor of the Pig's Head bar that was less than 10 meters away, the 5 Viper Cross believers who were dressed as adventurers were revising their plan on the parchment. The first batch of people will attack here. If that old thing Rubens has enough men, they will definitely appear here. We've included the additional manpower from the monastery. This way, we'll need to participate in the second attack after the enemy shows their trump card. The man in the robe was the leader of the team. His tone carried a hint of reverence as he whispered, "Lord Gallop seems to have a grudge against Priest Akasha. Anyone can see that they don't see eye to eye." The 2-meter-tall bald man replied in a low, muffled voice as he used a whetstone to carefully sharpen the tips of short spears. His words caused the atmosphere in the team to become a little silent. The Viper Cross sect had as many internal conflicts as the Rose Cross sect. Conflicts of interest between different bishops and families could be found everywhere. It was not uncommon for high-ranking bishops to be pushed to the bottom because of a certain mission. So, the 5 of them were feeling a lot of pressure. If they messed up the mission, they would not be able to escape. The escape route from the square to the west gate of the city has been prepared. If the west gate is blocked, we still have 2 other routes to leave. The tunnel at the edge of Cambay has been dug for half a year. It can be used anytime now. Lord Gallop has been planning for so long. We'll definitely complete the mission. Don't be too optimistic. The man in the robe leaned back on the wooden chair and narrowed his eyes as he pointed at the city square on the map. The Rose Cross sect is not to be trifled with. Once everything starts, then there's really no room for maneuver. *********17th of September. An unprecedented storm was brewing in Hollier City. The strange thing was that no one tried to stop the storm. They all thought that they had the absolute advantage, and were thinking about how to gain more benefits from the storm, but this was a small microcosm of the entire era. In the evening, Francis, who was in Moria's manor, had finished reading the parchment in his hand. At this time, his state had recovered from the previous depression. His tense nerves had relaxed a lot, and his heart was filled with faint anticipation and excitement. The fireplace reflected the warm light of the fire, dispelling the chill of the villa outside the city. The maidservant walked in with her head lowered and served the young count an exquisite tea. The latter threw the parchment into the fireplace and looked at the burning paper in a daze. He took a sip of the tea and waved his hand. Willie, who was at the door, walked in. "Those heathens still have no intention of cooperating with us, Master. They don't seem to trust us, but we found some interesting news outside the city," Willie reported in a low voice. Francis smiled and said, "If that's the case, what's the harm in helping those heretics once?" Willie nodded, and then Francis asked softly, "What about the monastery?" "Miss Sally, she has 2 mercenary groups in the city. Although they hid very well, we still found traces of them. If you need, we can take them tonight." Willie made a gesture of cutting his neck. Francis narrowed his eyes and snorted coldly. "She finally knows to be ruthless? We don't need to do anything today. Just keep an eye on her for a few days and wait until the night after tomorrow. She won't have time to make other preparations. Before that, just give her the illusion that victory is in her grasp. When the celebration is held, I will celebrate her becoming a priest." Francis clenched his fist confidently, then looked at Willie and said, "Is there any other news?" "There's one. Titus and Knight Wellington have arrived in Hollier City." After saying this, Francis's originally relaxed expression became a little unnatural, so fast. Although he had advanced to become an elementalist, and had become a mage that ordinary people could not defeat, Francis knew that even if he practiced for another 10 years, he might not be able to walk back and forth in front of these 2 knights. These 2 knights had truly followed his father through mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Their strength was absolutely terrifying, but they were in such a hurry to come here now. A certain speculation flashed through Francis's mind, and he hurriedly asked, "Did they go to the ducal palace?" "I visited as usual, but I just went to check today. Everything is the same as before. Lord Duke's condition has not improved." Willie thought for a moment and added, "Butler Alpha seems to be sick. When I went to the ducal palace, I did not see him." "It doesn't matter if Alpha is sick or not, the main thing is." Francis seemed to feel that there was something wrong, but he could not figure it out no matter how hard he tried. In the end, he waved his hand and said, "Forget it, I still feel that something is not right. Go and arrange more people to ensure that nothing goes wrong. Keep an eye on Titus and Wellington. Of course, don't get too close, or they will definitely find out." Francis's originally relaxed mood became a little uneasy because of this inexplicable message. He paced back and forth in front of the fireplace, but in the end, he did not make any changes to his plan. There are only a few days left, no more accidents. ******** The 18th of September. When he walked to the front of the monastery, Roddy looked at the towering steeple of the church. He gently pinched the die that he once gave to Sally, straightened his loose robe, touched the mustache that he used to disguise himself, took a deep breath, and walked into the church. Walking up the steps, the white stone floor was emitting a cold air. The stone pillar in the front hall still had the dents of crossbow bolt. Roddy remembered that Sally was hiding behind this stone pillar at that time. Now that he saw it, he could not help but sigh at the coincidence of fate. The temple guards wearing metal armor stood on both sides of the church expressionlessly. The cross and rose pattern on their chests were gorgeous and holy. Faint whispers came from the front. Most of them were the believers praying in low voices, or the priests explaining the doctrine of the church. As he breathed, he could smell the fragrance of roses that always lingered in the main hall of the church. At this time, Roddy had a big belly, 2 small mustaches on the side of his lips, and his eyes were shining brightly. Wearing a round hat, he looked like a merchant that could be seen everywhere in the city. Among the people who donated to the monastery, Apart from the nobles, this kind of person was the one who donated the most. Therefore, he did not encounter any obstacles along the way. Although it was not Sunday, more than half of the seats in the church were still occupied by all kinds of believers. After entering the main hall, Roddy drew a cross in front of the statue of the god, then found a seat in the corner and sat down. He pretended to be praying devoutly, while his eyes quietly glanced around. The expected Sally did not appear. Could it be that she did not see the message he left? Before this, Roddy had left a message in Martin's letter about the meeting today. In order to be safe, he had specifically confirmed that Martin had reported it to Sally. But now, she did not appear. Was there a problem? However, the extraordinary hearing that came with the acute environment allowed him to detect some clues. He looked behind the statue and roughly confirmed some things. Then he continued to wait. More than 10 meters away, Sally was already standing there. She slightly pursed her lips and leaned against the cold wall, avoiding Roddy's occasional glances like a thief. This idiot, although that was what she said, she did not hide the joy in her heart. It could even be said that there was an inexplicable sweetness in it. Back then, she had clenched her teeth to write that letter. Although the tone of her words was calm, her heart was filled with anxiety. That damned bastard left behind a harsh sentence and left. That feeling really made her feel so uncomfortable that she couldn't eat for a few days. Even that oval face of hers had become so thin that her chin was almost pointed. "You made me suffer so much, then I'll let you wait a little longer." Peeking, Sally found that Roddy was still sitting upright. She could not help but snigger. He even stuck a mustache. The bell at the top of the church rang, which proved that Roddy had waited for half an hour. Sally felt that this guy had waited enough. Then she tried hard to keep a straight face and stepped out. "Don't look at him. Don't look at him. You must pretend to be careless." Sally walked straight to the corner of the church with a straight face. She sat down beside Roddy and silently began to pray. Although she looked like she was praying, her ears were almost pricked up to listen to the movements around her. Her heart was thumping violently. But after a full minute, Roddy still could not speak. "This wooden lump bastard." Sally was a little impatient. "I'm sitting next to you, at least make some movement." And just when she wanted to say something, Roddy finally said, "That? Priest, I have something to confess to you." Before he finished his words, Sally, who had been keeping a straight face, burst into laughter. She pretended to turn her head and replied, "Only clergymen above priest can listen to the confession of believers. I'm just a nun, not a priest yet." Under the ends of her golden hair, Sally looked at the guy who had always made her worried and wanted to beat him up. After a fleeting smile, her pretty face tightened again. "However, if you don't use the confession room, I'm willing to listen to your confession here, as long as you don't mind, devout believer." That couldn't be better. Roddy coughed twice and pretended to draw a cross again. Although he had made a lot of anticipation before he spoke, the otaku Roddy was still a little nervous when he really expressed his feelings, such as apologizing. This was different from the game. It was one thing to be skillful in the game, but it was another thing to solemnly apologize to a friend. So he held it in for a long time and only came out with an inexplicable sentence, "Thank you." Sally raised her eyebrows, somewhat puzzled. "I did something I shouldn't have done and hurt someone I shouldn't have. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to apologize." Roddy tried to put all the words he wanted to say into one sentence. "I said something I shouldn't have said to you and left. I only hope it's not too late for me to say this now, because I—" Roddy swallowed. Those words that he had rehearsed many times before were finally deleted in his mind, and finally there was only one sentence left, "Because I don't want to lose you, this friend." Chapter 112. From Roddy's point of view, Sally's reaction was very strange. But what was strange was that he didn't think that his sentence would cause any problems. There was a moment of silence. Roddy waited for a full 3 seconds, only to find that Sally just stared at him blankly without any response. After a long sentence was broken, the two sentences before and after might represent completely different meanings, and obviously when Sally heard the sentence, "I don't want to lose you," her mind obviously went blank for a moment. As a result, the second half of the sentence, "You are a friend," was directly missed. This feeling, to others, was no different from Roddy unknowingly giving a nice guy card, but Sally unconsciously took it as a confession. Thump, thump, her heart was beating so fast that she could hear it herself. Sally had completely forgotten the answer that she originally thought of. I mean that. It was not until a few seconds later that she opened her mouth to say something, but then she felt that she had become a clumsy and ridiculous stuttering. When her eyes swept around in panic, she then remembered that she was in a church, and she was a nun. Such a fact suddenly froze her inexplicable excitement as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her. Her relationship with Roddy had always been separated by a layer of paper, but at this time, Roddy's words were basically equivalent to clarifying their relationship. But it was precisely because of this that the rule of nuns are not allowed to marry for the rest of their lives suddenly pressed down like a mountain. If she didn't give up her identity as a Rose-Cross Holy Cathedral, then it was destined that nothing would happen between her and Roddy. Thinking of this, her originally radiant little face suddenly dimmed, like a wilted flower in the sun. After thinking for a long time, she replied in a low voice, I accept your apology." Actually, after exchanging a few words, the original misunderstanding quickly disappeared, but the somewhat ambiguous atmosphere from before directly faded, as if the two of them had resumed the slightly distant communication when they were escaping. Roddy didn't feel too much. His destined to be alone for the rest of his life characteristic prevented him from thinking about other things. He even felt very happy at this moment because Sally had forgiven him. In the future, this daughter of Duke and the Dukes of Angmar could possibly become powerful backers. In a good mood, he looked around and pretended to confess something in a low voice. However, he was actually asking Sally about Francis and the celebration. "Francis' men will definitely take action. I've prepared 2 groups of mercenaries. Viceroy Rubens seems to have an idea as well. He said that many heretics tried to assassinate him along the way." Although the information obtained from the Pig's Head bar was miscellaneous, it was after all not as accurate as the information obtained by Sally's special tracking team. In just a few minutes, Roddy had obtained a large amount of accurate data about Francis and his men. However, after asking, Roddy found that Sally in front of him seemed to be in a low mood. He asked curiously, "Are you all right? Are you not feeling well?" Sally shook her head and smiled a little reluctantly. She said, "I will also stand on the stage the day after tomorrow. Francis will probably take action at that time, and this is the only chance I have to tell him. It will be a chaotic battle. You have to be careful. By the way, is there any news from the Ducal Palace?" Roddy didn't directly talk about the antidote, so he just wanted to ask in a roundabout way. "What news?" Sally was a little puzzled. Seeing that she didn't know anything, Roddy guessed that the old Duke hadn't woken up yet, so he didn't ask further. He shook his head and said, "Nothing, just asking." At this point, the conversation fell into a short silence. Both of them were thinking about their own things. Surprisingly, neither of them continued to talk about new topics. Previously, he had developed a bad impression of Sally and just wanted to kill Francis and leave. But now that the knot in his heart had been untied, he found that his plans and arrangements had been completely changed. Thinking that today was already the 18th, he felt that time was running out. However, because he had prepared well in advance, he soon had a rough plan. Thinking about the schedule of Sodeler and the others, he said softly, "Don't worry about the battle between the sections. You just need to protect yourself. If you really think that you can get rid of him completely, I mean, if you are really sure that you won't go easy on him, then go to the west gate and keep walking along the road." Hearing this, Sally neither nodded nor shook her head. She just stared at the statue in front of her blankly. When Roddy stood up, she also stood up like a mechanic, but her eyes were still looking down. She said softly, "I actually didn't want to do this. The battle between my brother and me, the battle between the sects, I didn't want you to get involved. It could have had nothing to do with you, it could have had nothing to do with me, but now it has." Roddy heaved a sigh of relief. The depressed mood of the past few days had finally been completely relieved. He raised his hand and put the voodoo die on the table. "You remember your oath, and I remember mine, don't I?" Sally looked at the unremarkable die in her hand dumbly, but suddenly felt that it was heavy. Her heart seemed to be filled with something, and her nose felt a little sour. "Remember to protect yourself. Don't take risks. Don't get hurt." After saying this, Roddy drew a cross on his chest, bowed slightly like a believer, and then took a few steps back, turned around and left. Meanwhile, Sally silently watched as his figure disappeared in front of the monastery gates. She clenched the dice in her hand tightly. That night, a group of travel-worn soldiers appeared in the forest outside Hollier. There were a total of 29 people in this team, but they did not find a village or town to stay in outside Hollier. Instead, they hid in the wilderness and were not discovered by anyone. Normally, when a troop camped at night, it would definitely be unusually noisy, but this troop was frighteningly quiet. Everyone had a clear division of labor, and they obeyed orders and prohibitions. The soldiers with long swords had sharp gazes, and when they entered a state of preparation for battle, their whole body exuded a valiant and bloody aura. They were obviously elites who had experienced many battles and survived on the battlefield. At around midnight, Roddy's figure appeared near the campsite. He used a prearranged secret signal to contact the soldiers on night duty. He then gave the scouts of Norland Village, whom he had not seen for a long time, orders and arrangements for the upcoming battle. After everything was over, he left the camp in the early hours of the morning and returned to Hollier City. His figure quickly hid in the undercurrent of the surging crowd. An ordinary day passed quickly. On the morning of the 20th of September, when the sun rose, the grand square speech slowly began. At this time, the number of people in the entire city who knew the name Roddy was less than 5. In Bishop Benjamin's eyes, the name Roddy had already been tossed to the back of his mind. He was just an insignificant scout. Compared to the big event that was about to happen, there was no need to pay attention to such a character. To Francis, Roddy was just one of the scumbags waiting to settle the score. Even though Roddy had foiled his plans a few times, when he thought about his upcoming massive plan, he could not help but feel that Roddy was just an ant under the wheels of a car, not even worth mentioning. In his eyes, Roddy might be able to rely on his luck and strength to block the streams and rivers, but when the real tsunami came crashing down, this poor scout would definitely be smashed to death. There was no other possibility. An individual who was not extremely powerful was trash in front of a group. This was the truth that everyone knew. Therefore, from the beginning when the various forces began to plan, Roddy was not included in the consideration of these people at all. However, in such an early morning, in the ducal palace of Lucifron, the indifferent voice of the Dukes of Angmar sounded. The city of Hollier will always be Lucifron's city of Hollier. Too many people have broken the rules during this period of time when I didn't pay attention to it. And now there are still people who want to stir up trouble under my watch. So, at this time I called you here. In front of a spacious and comfortable armchair, the skinny Dukes of Angmar spoke calmly, but the unquestionable meaning in his words was very obvious. In front of him, 2 knights with bodies like iron towers knelt on one knee, quietly waiting for orders. I don't want to say much. Since they want to hold a feast, then I will tell them who is in charge here. Titus, Wellington, do you understand what I mean? The sun was high up in the sky, and the civilians gradually gathered in the city square. In the past, the city square, which was more than 100 meters wide, would be filled with a large number of merchants from morning onwards. In an environment dominated by the natural economy, this was one of the few areas where free trade could be carried out. However, it was obvious that there would be no space for any merchants today, because the city guards had imposed a curfew on the square since the early hours of the morning. The soldiers of the Rose Cross Holy Cathedral had cleaned the ground, and rose petals specially transported from Gig Town had been placed into flower baskets, waiting to be scattered when the bishop's team passed by. On the east and west sides of the square were two-story stone buildings. The sturdy structure was enough for the believers to watch the speech from the open-air corridors and balconies. On the south side of the square, there were roads leading to the east, west, and south. As time passed, more and more believers began to gather in the square, just to compete to see the high-ranking governor of the Rose Cross Holy Cathedral. It was a sunny day, and the air was a little cold at the end of September. However, there was plenty of sunshine these days, quietly brewing the last bit of tranquility of autumn. However, the speech ceremony that was incomparably peaceful in the eyes of others turned into a simple sentence in the eyes of the observant. Chapter 113. Those heretics are ready, right? As Rubens spoke, he adjusted the gold and red bishop's crown on his head. His crimson robe was dignified and gorgeous, revealing a rarely seen majesty in this city. Although he was talking about his mortal enemy, the Viper Cross, he did not seem nervous at all. Benjamin, who was wearing a dark blue bishop's robe, handed over the heavy golden scepter and replied, "Everything is going according to plan. The nobles in the city are basically unaware of it, so they did not prepare too many private soldiers. It should not affect the heretics' actions." It's not the first time I've used myself as bait, but if I didn't do this, it would be really difficult to lure that troublesome guy out. The Holy Cathedral has given me so many people this time. If I can't solve this problem, it will be really hard to explain when I go back. However, I might not be able to announce your appointment letter today. Of course I'm mentally prepared. Benjamin smiled, then seemed to have thought of something and asked, "If there are no archers on the periphery of the square, I always feel a little uncertain about such an arrangement. If it's arranged, they will die silently, so it's better to save unnecessary losses." Rubens gripped the scepter tightly and lightly tapped it on the ground. A pale golden light flashed from the mageweth on the surface of the scepter, like an electric current gathering at the tip of the scepter. The buff spell, Blessing of Wisdom, was instantly cast. Enveloped in a blue light, the bishop walked out of the house and continued, "Bows and arrows have never been able to determine the outcome of a battle. I think you should understand this." Benjamin wanted to nod in agreement, but when he thought of the incident that happened a few days ago, he hesitated for a moment and did not express his opinion. He tidied his robe and followed the bishop to the carriage that was already prepared at noon. The gate in front of the monastery opened on time. The guards of honor drove out, and the believers surrounding the gate were pushed aside by the guards, making a path in the middle. The 24 holy knights, dressed in fresh clothes, surrounded the front and back of the carriage tightly. The bishop's carriage was a hollow wooden structure, not an enclosed carriage. Therefore, when they walked on the street, the believers could clearly see Bishop Rubens and Bishop Benjamin waving at them through the gaps in the carriage. Cheers rang out, and the prayers of the believers began to spread through the streets and alleys. The rose petals in the flower baskets were sprinkled down from the roof of the 3-story building, filling the air with a rich floral fragrance. The believers near the carriages rushed towards the carriages, and the guards formed a human wall to resist the crowd. Roddy, who was hidden in the crowd, looked at the scene in front of him and unconsciously stopped. the believers who scrambled to touch the edge of the carriage, the silver-armored apologetic knights, the sky full of petals, and the countless followers in robes seemed to form a very powerful oil painting, giving him an indescribable visual impact. In the past, no matter how many times he had heard of such a grand religious event, it was still incomparable to personally witnessing it. Witnessing a scene that was difficult to reproduce even in modern society, Roddy couldn't help but sigh at the power of religion. However, Roddy was very clear about the meaning behind the saying, "Where there are people, there will be martial arts." Behind the interests, be it religious forces or noble forces, ultimately represented the result of the struggle between people. Everything was just like the inevitable battle that would happen next, it was simply unavoidable. The procession in front led countless believers towards the square, and the city nobles in luxurious clothes were already standing in the square. The operating funds of every religion ultimately depended on the donations of these nobles, so the Rose Cross also attached importance to the nobles in Hollier. Basically every speech was invited, and naturally, that included Count Francis, who was dressed in a luxurious dark green robe. At this moment, he was softly chatting with the Viscount beside him. Francis, who had a relaxed expression, was using his fingertips to rub the dagger at his waist and the magic wand that represented his identity as an elementalist. His eyes were constantly sweeping across the crowd, and occasionally he would exaggeratedly laugh a few times during the conversation to show that he was very interested in the upcoming event. Naturally, he was looking forward to this square speech more than anyone else. At this moment, it was time for the truth to be revealed. It was just that when everyone standing in the shadows thought that they would be the final winner, perhaps none of them would have thought that Roddy, who had long been standing in the corner of the square and was ignored by all forces, was the most well-prepared participant. The 12 holy knights in front were surrounded by the believers as they walked to the edge of the square. Waves of cheers came from there. After the carriage slowly came to a stop, the guards on both sides tightly surrounded it. Governor Rubens and Bishop Benjamin looked at each other, as if confirming something, then raised their palms and gestured to the believers to walk towards the podium in the middle of the square. But just as they walked less than 10 meters away, an accident happened. To say that it was an accident was actually to the believers who did not know what was going on, but to those in the shadows, everything that happened in front of them was like a script that had long been arranged, and there was nothing to be surprised about. Ha! A loud roar suddenly tore through the chaotic cheers. The crowd that was crowding around Rubens suddenly seemed to be pushed away by something from the inside. Boom! 3 to 4 figures jumped out from the gap after the crowd expanded. They were holding daggers or knives in their hands, and without a word, they charged towards Rubens and Benjamin. The crowd was in an uproar. The believers were shocked by this sudden scene and stood rooted to the ground. The assassination of the Viper Cross happened without any surprise, and to the Rose Cross Holy Cathedral, who was already prepared, it could even be said to be a little boring. Behind the 3 assassins were another 5 people, but they did not charge forward. Instead, they raised the crossbows that were originally hidden on their bodies and pulled the trigger at the Holy Cathedral guards. At such a close distance, there was almost no space to dodge the arrows. But just as the arrows were about to explode, Benjamin and Rubens did not just stand there and stare blankly. Instead, they immediately chanted an incantation and quickly released the divine arts that they had long prepared. Blessing of Valor, Level 3. Guardian Shield, Level 3. In the next moment, the sound of jingle exploded in everyone's ears, and the crossbows in front of the Holy Cathedral guards and the bishops were all deflected by an invisible force. After that, the heavily armored guards received the Blessing of Valor. They immediately raised the weapons in their hands and collided with the charging assassins. Bang, bang, bang. Cries of pain, curses, and orders were mixed together, but the chaos did not spread. Because the number of assassins was too small, the Holy Cathedral guards who had the advantage in numbers almost immediately subdued the assassins. This seemed to be just the appetizer of the entire assassination. Just as the guard formation was thrown into disarray because of this, more figures armed with weapons suddenly rushed out from the crowd behind them. At the same time, crossbow bolts flew from all over the place and completely enveloped the two bishops in front of the carriage. This brutal scene completely scared the originally fanatical believers. After all, the commoners were not trained Holy Cathedral guards, they instinctively retreated, but this only served to highlight those who were originally mixed in the crowd with ill intentions. There were a total of 40 people. Assassins! Protect the bishops! Tighten the formation! Boom! The shouting was suddenly interrupted by a loud explosion. The crowd was so frightened that they stopped shouting. They even squatted down as if they had become shorter. That was because a huge fireball had exploded beside the carriage. The entire carriage was a hollow structure that was not sturdy enough to begin with, and now that it was hit by an explosive fireball, half of the carriage was instantly blown to pieces, and the shock wave that swept out in all directions directly killed the horses, while the driver and a few guards nearby were blown away. Because of the group divine art, guardian shield, protection, Rubens and Benjamin were still standing firmly on the spot. The guards that rushed over from the side raised their huge shields, and in the midst of the flashes of light, divine arts were released one after another. The armor of the soldiers glowed with a greenish-gray luster, and there were also no less than 2 halos faintly appearing under their feet. Because of the crowd around them, the 24 holy knights could not move their horses, so they simply jumped down and rushed to the side of the bishop. Including the 16 shield-wielding guards from before, at this moment, there were now 40 densely packed Holy Cathedral guards surrounding Bishop Rubens's carriage. This did not include the more than 30 soldiers who were guarding beside the people in the monastery, nor did they include the private soldiers of the nobles, who were rather skilled. Obviously, although the 40 assassins appeared with great momentum, they did not have the ability to immediately injure the well-prepared Bishop Rubens. From an absolutely rational point of view, this form of assassination by the Viper Cross was completely like a typical brainless operation, because it did not have the "if the attack fails, flee 1,000 miles away" goal. It was as if it had come up with this idea on the spur of the moment, afraid that the whole world would not know that it was going to assassinate the bishop. It actually only sent out a few people for the first wave of assassination, so that the guards who had organized their defensive forces were completely unafraid of the assassination team of a few dozen people. In a sense, this was no longer an assassination, but a war. The believers were scared out of their wits by this scene, screaming and fleeing in all directions. In the midst of the chaos, the scene erupted into a real bloody conflict. The second fireball drew a bright yellow trajectory and violently exploded on the shield of a soldier. Boom! The corpse that was blown away fell to the ground, and a gap appeared in the circular shield formation, but very quickly, there were people who filled the gap and waved their weapons fiercely at the assassins of the Viper Cross. At the moment when the weapons clashed, angry shouts and cries of pain rang through the square. Blades and armors clashed, and blood sprayed everywhere. There were people who fell to the ground and became corpses, but they were stepped on by others as they continued forward. Chapter 114. After the battle broke out, the innocent believers were instantly implicated. But when the bright red color blossomed in the surroundings, Superintendent Rubens looked ahead coldly. There was no pity in his frozen expression, and he stood there like a steel statue. Battles in the era of cold weapons could only be described as cruel. When the chaos broke out, the sound waves and atmosphere that surged towards them were definitely unimaginable by modern people. The blades shone with a cold glint, and every swing brought about a large amount of blood. Bodies were separated, limbs were severed, and heads were severed. The heart-wrenching screams and angry roars were deafening. The believers who had no ability to resist screamed in pain. Some were even hacked to death by the Viper Cross killers 10 meters away from the superintendent. But Rubens turned a blind eye to it. He continued to bless the temple guards with his divine arts, and his gaze did not even linger on the civilians for a moment. Although such an indifferent attitude towards life was necessary at this moment, Bishop Benjamin could not help but feel a chill in his heart. Because all of this was already planned. In other words, the sacrifices of the believers had long been foreseen. The current scene of a large number of believers dying was completely within his expectations. In order to get rid of the tumor that was the Viper Cross once and for all, in order to allow the enemy to appear without reservation, the superintendent had planned from the beginning to let the believers get close to him, and purposely let the enemy hide among them. A few days ago, when they were discussing this matter, Benjamin still held some objections. But Rubens's words, "necessary sacrifices are unavoidable," had coldly rejected his suggestion. A higher-ranking official could crush a person, and within the church, Benjamin's authority was ultimately not enough to continue speaking. So at this moment, he could only try his best to cast the recovery, divine arts on the injured who were closer to him. As for those who were far away or could not see, he could only silently sigh and give up on the idea of saving them. War was, after all, cruel. The Viper Cross believers were not weak. Each of them had a basic level of 8 or even 10. Ordinary believers and soldiers were easily taken down like melons and vegetables, and when these thugs collided with the temple guards that had been blessed with strength, defense, and fighting spirit, it was as if a wave had finally hit a dam and they instantly stopped. The noisy shouts gradually faded away. The believers near the governor had all run away within a few minutes. Rubens, on the other hand, stood there with the scepter in his hand. He did not seem to take the assassination seriously at all. He pretended to be conserving his strength. At the same time, as the nobles were further away, they were completely in a spectating state. Ladies and young ladies shrieked and retreated, but the greater part of the titled old noblemen remained where they were, and took immediate action, ordering their retainers to assist in the purging of the heretics, in an attempt to extricate His Eminence from the situation. But as it was an official occasion, there were not many retainers who were qualified to carry weapons and participate in the battle. But the 20-plus retainers who charged forward immediately tipped the scales of victory towards the Rose Cross Temple. When all of this happened, Roddy, who was standing in the corner, did not move. The stealth spell allowed him to blend into the shadows under the balcony. He held the short bow in his hand and the explosive arrow was already knocked on the bow. He breathed steadily and narrowed his eyes as he scanned the chaotic battle in the distance. "It's still early," when he muttered. Rubens, who had not moved at all, seemed to finally move. "Really? Enough." The golden scepter suddenly stopped, and with a cracking sound, it was as if the solid floor was shattered by some kind of force. What followed was an invisible explosion. Golden prayers appeared around the guards, and a god's shield, that could absorb damage, appeared on every paladin's body. This group skill was a powerful divine spell that could only be released after advancing to level 20. It was extremely exhausting to cast, but it also showed that Rubens's strength was not something that these heretics could provoke. "Gallop, still not showing yourself?" His cold words echoed in the square. The sounds of the battle seemed to be suppressed. But in fact, it was an illusion created after the god's shield blocked most of the swords. In a battle of this scale, the group shield was almost equivalent to a spell of invincibility that lasted 3 to 6 seconds. It sounded like it was just a damage absorption spell, but in fact the effect was far greater than the literal meaning. The paladin's guards were elites who followed Rubens, and they had a tacit understanding with the governor. So the moment the divine spell was cast, they immediately gave up on defense and attacked the heretics without holding back. The defensive circle that had been shrinking had been compressed to its limit. At this moment, the sudden counterattack made the attacking Viper Cross assassins unable to react in time, and 7 or 8 of them were killed on the spot. By the time they reacted, the retainers of the nobles had already joined the battle from the side. The situation seemed to have become clear, and these brutal assassins were bound to lose. But just as these heretics were about to be surrounded and annihilated, a purple light suddenly flashed around the governor, as if an invisible force had suddenly shrouded the cylindrical guards. Shadow purification. A hoarse voice came from not far away, and the god's shield immediately shattered, indicating that this little invincibility had lost its effect. Immediately after, 3 pitch-black shadow arrows. The shield-wielding soldiers tried to block the attack of the spell, but they did not expect to be directly pierced through together with their shields. Their entire bodies were sent flying, and when they landed on the ground, they were already dead. Such a powerful spell directly represented the difference between an advanced profession and a basic profession. A figure in a cloak was the first to walk out from the chaotic crowd that had retreated. He was thin, with a mocking smile on his face and a short cane in his hand. It was Snaketooth Gallop. He raised his hand and released another shadow arrow, as if he was taking a stroll in the park. He said with some surprise, "I didn't expect the famous Governor Rubens to know my name." When he stood in front, another 40 to 50 people walked out from the chaotic crowd behind him, including the team of adventurers that Roddy had encountered previously. Almost at the same time as they walked out of the crowd, a few strong spellcasters in this team immediately threw 3 fireball spells in succession, directly wiping out the group of nobles' private soldiers in front of them. Some of the nobles' henchmen who had dodged the attack wanted to rush over to attack them, but just as they took a few steps closer, they saw the 2-meter-tall bald man rush out like lightning, knocking 3 or 4 of them into the air with a bang. Some of the henchmen behind him wanted to slash with their longswords, but their necks were directly broken by this guy's extremely fast punch. Their bodies ran a few steps away, and with a plop they fell to the ground, dead on the spot. Casually picking up the longsword on the ground, the muscular man threw it as if he had just casually thrown it, and it directly nailed into the head of a noble's henchman who was running over. Blood and brain matter splattered all over the ground, and the corpse directly fell to the ground and rolled on the ground. The horrifying scene made the temple guards feel a great deal of pressure. "Rubens, it's been a long time." Gallop's tone was unusually playful, and then he turned his gaze to the side. "To make a long story short, Lady Akasha and I have been ordered to send you to hell. I hope your journey will be pleasant." At this time, there were already more than 70 of the 27 heretics alive, including these 40 to 50 people, and just as he finished speaking, another group of people appeared in Rubens's team. There were about 20 people, and they were vaguely led by a woman wearing a gray robe and a veil. The appearance of Akasha and her subordinates increased the number of people in the Viper Cross to nearly 100, and among them were more than 13 assassins of advanced professions. By now, the intentions of the Viper Cross could not be more obvious. They no longer just wanted to assassinate the 2 bishops, they wanted to completely eliminate the temple guards along with Rubens and Benjamin. From the initial assassination of 8 people, to the surprise attack of 40 people, and now the siege of nearly 100 people, the reason why the Viper Cross did this was not foolishness, but to purposely wait for the temple guards to gather together, so that they could kill them all at once. Although the heretics only had a slight advantage in numbers, but with the powerhouses with advanced professions, and Gallop who had reached level 28, Bishop Rubens's team was immediately in danger. Shadow energy gathered in front of him, and the shadow priest Gallop, nicknamed Snake's Fang, played with the staff in his hand. That fake smile hung on his face like a mask, as if he was teasing a prey that was about to die. He bowed slightly and said softly, "I know that you still have 2 hidden teams that have yet to appear. So I present you with this big gift. What do you think?" Gallop's words obviously meant that he had a card up his sleeve. Obviously, He and his men were not afraid of the two teams that Rubens had prepared for them. The chaotic battle gradually came to a stop as the situation changed drastically. Both sides retreated a little. The temple guards could not help but show some fear after hearing Gallup's words. Their arms that were holding their weapons and shields were trembling due to the fatigue from the battle, and undisguised panting echoed from under their helmets. Putting aside the pressure brought by the snake's fang, Rubens, who bore the brunt of the attack at that moment, chuckled, interrupting Gallup's desire to continue speaking. Heh! The shield-wielding temple guards were gently pushed away by Rubens, and the figure in the red robe slowly walked out from the middle of the team. Every time the golden staff touched the ground, there was a crisp echo. Rubens's footsteps were calm and steady, and there was always a calm smile on his face. Gallup, who was not far away, slightly furrowed his brows. Rubens stood at the front of the team, surrounded by 4 shield-wielding guards. Behind him was Bishop Benjamin, who was following closely behind him. Gallup, your plan has been carried out since half a year ago, right? His words made Gallup slightly clench the short staff in his hand. As if sensing that something was wrong, Gallup squinted his triangular eyes and replied tentatively, "You seem to know quite a lot." "Of course I do." Rubens did not mind Gallup's cold gaze at all. His fingers caressed the complicated patterns on the handle of the staff, and the corner of his lips curled up slightly. The expression of, "I'm going to lay my cards on the table," was obvious. After his left hand made a spell-casting gesture, he lightly tapped the staff on the ground, and a warm aura spread out in all directions. The group recovery spell quickly healed the injured temple guards. As the atmosphere of the team changed, the bishop spread out his palm and said softly, "Priest Akasha told me everything, so of course I know." Chapter 115. The atmosphere in the square froze for a moment. No one would have thought that the battle would take such a sudden turn. The well-prepared Viper Cross had been completely tricked by the Rose Cross, due to the existence of a traitor. Such a thing was indeed a little dramatic. Gallup, who was initially complacent, was first stunned, then his angry roar echoed throughout the square. "Akasha! You traitor!" Akasha, who was in the crowd, did not face Gallup's question directly. Her gaze flickered to the side. She, who was not a strong character in the first place, took 2 steps back because of Gallup's roar. She had a gentle personality, and made such a decision because she could not withstand the immense pressure from the Viper Cross. She did not expect that Rubens would directly call out her name. It was obvious that he was not giving her any way out. The older, the wiser. Although she had made what she thought was the right choice, she was still too inexperienced in front of these old politicians. After her identity was exposed, the initiative was completely in Rubens's hands. She would definitely become a great enemy of the Viper Cross. In other words, she would only be able to live a peaceful life under the protection of the Rose Cross. There was no other way out. However, no matter how Akasha felt at that moment, the fact that she had betrayed the Viper Cross and revealed all of their plans to the Rose Cross could not be changed. Gallup pointed at her angrily, unable to say anything else. Rubens, on the other hand, maintained a calm demeanor. The feeling that everything was under his control made him confidently take a step forward. With the tone of a general in a chess game, he questioned, "Then? I'll accept your gift." "My gift? Do you want to accept it? Do you really think that I only have 2 teams of soldiers to deal with everything?" Gallup's expression instantly changed when he heard this. He immediately looked around. Outside the noisy crowd, there seemed to be the faint rumbling of horse hooves. "Damn it! It's the Holy Knights!" With a violent wave of his staff, the Shadow Priest immediately cast the buff spell, Shadow's Hand, on the helpers beside him, forcibly adding shadow magic damage to their weapons. He then decisively waved his hand, pointed at Rubens, and shouted angrily, "Kill him! Don't care about anything else." There was no other way. Gallop's decisive decision to die together was not out of Rubens's expectations. As the staff shot out another beam of light, the city square that had just quieted down once again erupted into an even more intense and bloody massacre. The nobles who had been watching from the sidelines finally calmed down. Although many had retreated under the cover of their retainers, upon hearing the news that everything was under the control of Bishop Rubens, they immediately stopped in their tracks. In order to regain their previous image, they stood at the back to stand at the back of the nobles, to show that they were fearless. But among them there was only one. That was Count Francis. Surrounded by 8 guards, he had been looking in the direction where Bishop Rubens was. The distance between the two was only about 50 meters, but at this moment it was as if they were in 2 different worlds. Many of the people who had retreated into the halls and shops on both sides of the street gradually came out. There were even people shouting slogans such as, "Punish these heretics." "My apologies, Bishop Francis." Francis looked at the old man in the distance who thought that he was in control of the situation, and the corner of his mouth curled up into a sneer. He then turned his head and asked Willie, who was always by his side, "Is everyone ready? We have people on the paths that the 4 teams of holy knights must pass through. We can hold them off for at least 5 minutes." Willie's gaze swept around, and he quickly found the mercenaries hiding behind the giant flower pots on the side of the square. They were dressed in civilian clothes, and their disguises were flawless. They were even squatting not far away, looking at them with empty hands. Next, Francis held the sword that was originally used as a decoration by his side, and said in a low voice, "It's time for us to make our appearance." Willie immediately nodded. He raised his hand and made a seemingly casual gesture, but in fact it was a signal to the mercenaries not far away. At the same time, Francis shouted, "Kill these heretics!" He waved his hand, as if he was ready to let his henchmen go up and help kill Gallop and the others. In an instant, the tight protection around him was completely gone. Crack! The next moment, a flower pot not far away was smashed with a loud noise, causing the nobles closest to it to turn their heads in unison. What happened next made it hard for them to figure out what was going on. A group of people dressed in all kinds of clothes rushed to the flower pot and began to pick up the ceramic shards. Just when the bystanders thought that there was something good in the flower pot, one of them raised something in his hand and turned his head. A military crossbow that was much larger than a hand crossbow was held horizontally in front of him. When the nearest henchman realized what it was, he aimed at Francis and pulled the trigger. Whoosh! Francis, who had lost the protection of his henchmen, could not dodge the attack from more than 30 meters away. The crossbow bolt directly hit Francis's arm. He cried out in pain, as if the force of the bolt had caused him to lose his balance, and he fell to the ground. "Assassin! Protect the young master!" "It's an assassin!" A few guards who had just walked out immediately noticed the situation here and rushed to Francis' side to protect him. Then, the guy holding the crossbow at the flowerbed saw that his shot missed and immediately rushed forward with his 7 or 8 companions behind him. The 2 groups of people clashed with each other. On the second-floor platform 40 meters away, Roddy, who had been hiding in the shadows, squinted his eyes. The arrow that was aimed at Francis's head slowly moved down, and then the bowstring returned to its original shape. He was ready to assassinate Francis, and he was confident that he could kill him with one shot. However, the scene where Francis exposed a flaw and was shot made Roddy immediately feel that something was wrong. Ordinary people might not be able to see the anomaly, but he deduced a strange fact from the trajectory of the crossbow bolt. The bolt had no arrowhead. Who would shoot someone with a crossbow bolt without an arrowhead? Because of the wide field of vision, he immediately saw more than 20 people rushing out from the crowd on the other side, directly pouncing on the group of monks and nuns. "Damn, you're still trying to injure yourself to gain sympathy? You're really something." Roddy immediately understood Francis's plan. He was planning to create an assassination drama to clear his suspicion, and then blatantly send people to assassinate Sally here. At this time, there were many options in front of Roddy. He could continue to choose to kill Francis, or he could choose to help Sally, who was under attack. As for the other option, Roddy looked at Gallop and the others who were madly charging at Rubens and Benjamin. After analyzing the situation in an instant, he slowly took a step back and disappeared behind this already unnoticeable windowsill with the stealth spell. Rubens liked the feeling of controlling the whole situation. To a certain extent, his desire for control had reached an extreme level, so much so that it could be called a quirk. Every detail of the layout, every person he arranged, he had an extremely meticulous plan. It could even be said that it was so precise that it made one's hair stand on end. For example, the defensive formation of the soldiers, the gap left when they raised their shields, all of these were done according to Viceroy Rubens's own orders. Looking at Gallop madly attacking him with all his might, Benjamin's expression did not change, but the satisfaction in his heart was indescribable. Because according to his plan, in another 5 seconds, the holy knights that rushed out from the corner of the street would directly cut these heretics in front of him into pieces. Looking at Akasha, who was at a loss in the distance, Rubens felt a little disdainful towards her. This woman was not suitable for power struggles at all. She was too weak, too indecisive. Just because of a few childish ideas, she would betray the information that the Viper Cross wanted to assassinate him. What did she want? She just wanted to leave that damned cult. It's not that easy to wash away a person's background. When this is over, let her be a nun for the rest of her life. With that in mind, Benjamin, who was beside him, cast a holy light recovery and asked with a frown, "Sir Viceroy, the holy knights should be here by now, right?" As soon as he finished speaking, 3 consecutive shadow arrows exploded on the shield in front of Rubens. The Viceroy waved his scepter to add a new shield to the soldiers, and then replied calmly, "It shouldn't be too bad. The leading knight has followed me for many years. He knows what I value the most." Severe obsessive-compulsive disorder and a strict concept of time were Rubens's personal habit. Everyone who followed him knew this. However, when Benjamin heard that, he looked at the quiet corner of the street, only to see the believers cowering behind the wall and observing them. The faint sound of horse hooves had disappeared, and he felt that something was wrong. Just as he was about to say something, he heard Gallop's crazy chanting, "Shadows give me power, I give shadow life." Chapter 116. Where there is light there will be shadows. The shadow priest, Gallop, who stood against the holy light, controlled the powerful power of shadows. In front of him, 2 translucent creatures that looked like they were made of thick fog slowly rose from the ground. They were initially shapeless like mud, but as Gallop pointed his short staff at the gladiator with the highest damage, the 2 shadows instantly took on the same form as the gladiator. His well-defined muscles, his tall physique, and even the scimitar in his hand to increase the lethality of his attack were exactly the same. This spell required Gallop to continuously chant and control it, so he kept his staff raised high and cast a shadow wall that was much stronger than the holy shield in front of him. This high-level shield could only be cast once at a time, and its only flaw was that it could not protect the caster from all directions like the holy shield. However, the 120 degrees defensive angle was enough to block most of the attacks in front of him. Behind him, the Viper Cross assassins kept surging forward. Those powerful members with advanced professions were desperately trying to weaken the defense in front of Rubens, while the 2 shadow guards charged into the fray under Gallop's continuous casting, charging at Rubens together. Boom! A Sanctum guard raised his shield to block, but was kicked by the shadow guard. The sound was as loud as the tolling of a bell. The shield with a metal surface and wooden frame caved in on the Sanctum guard's arm, and the huge force shattered the bones in his arm. His body flew out and crashed into 3 or 4 of his companions before falling to the ground. This power seemed to be far more terrifying than the bald man. After the 2 shadow guards charged into the crowd with the gladiator, they immediately set off a storm of blood. With absolute strength, they were invincible, and no one could stop them. "Lord Governor, there's a problem." Before he could finish, Rubens interrupted him with a terrible look on his face. Obviously, he understood that the 4 teams of Templar Knights had not appeared until now. Something must have happened. "It shouldn't be like this, it shouldn't be like this." He swung his scepter forward, and a golden beam of light struck the mage who was casting fireballs in front of him. Crack! The mage's scepter was instantly shattered, and he was sent flying. However, he was a light priest after all, and his destructive power couldn't compare to the Shadow Priest Gallop at all. Such a divine spell wouldn't be able to solve his current predicament. The heretics had already surrounded him and the guards around him. Rose-Cross, who had yet to receive reinforcements, was in danger. Rubens was getting more and more anxious. Based on the current situation, the few advanced professional assassins that had rushed in were enough to threaten his life. Damn it, what was going on? Who dares to stop my soldiers? Turning his eyes, Rubens saw Akasha and the surrendered heretics standing in the crowd not far away. Rubens immediately thought of a possibility. He cursed in his heart, "Traitors cannot be trusted." He waved his hand and a light of punishment hit her. He shouted angrily, "Akasha, how dare you trick me? This bitch! I shouldn't have trusted her at all." Venting his anger in a moment of desperation was not something a bishop should do. However, he really couldn't calm down at this time. After all, based on the information he had, Akasha was the one who had the most opportunity and motive to harm him. Who else would target the Rose Cross? Naturally, he didn't think that it was Francis, an unrelated guy, who had stopped his Templar Knights. Therefore, Akasha and her men were immediately classified as enemies by him. After this attack, the 3 tall figures, 1 white and 2 black, had already rushed all the way to not far away from him like a chariot, pressing down on him like a mountain. The bald man kicked away the guard in front of Rubens. His high martial arts allowed him to deal with the siege of 3 or 4 guards with ease. The machete in his hand slashed and slashed with great force, and every strike was fatal. When his left hand punched out, even the holy shield could only block it for a moment before it completely shattered. "Get out of here!" the muscular man roared angrily. He also suffered a lot of injuries, and there were a few bloody wounds. However, he had released the berserk roar, which was similar to the bloodlust spell. At this time, he almost ignored the pain. His attack power and attack speed had increased by 30%. Therefore, the Templar guards in front of him couldn't even block him and were blasted away. He almost sacrificed his life to destroy the last line of defense in front of Rubens. The real trump card was naturally the 2 shadow guards that followed behind. They were controlled by Gallop's short wand. At this time, their bodies had become a little thinner, but their power did not decrease at all. A huge wave of air exploded from the muscular man's body. He swung his arm and threw his weapon, directly impaling a guard who couldn't dodge in time. At the same time, he swung his fist and directly sent the last guard in front of the 2 old men flying. Rubens and Benjamin's divine arts rained down on him, forcing him to take a few steps back. However, the 2 shadow guards took advantage of the situation and rushed over. The divine arts immediately poured down on the 2 guards, but no matter how many holes or mutilations were created on their bodies, as long as Gallop, who was chanting a spell with his short wand in the distance, continued to cast the spell, the 2 guards would always maintain their form and attack power. At this moment, both Rubens and Benjamin experienced the suffocating feeling of facing the god of death. The opponent's raised scimitar could not be stopped at all. The guards beside them had already been sent flying, and some of their corpses were not even complete. Blood spurted out of nowhere and flowed down the holy shield in front of them, as if foreshadowing the fate of the two bishops of high status and authority. The two retreated one after another. The few divine arts that attacked Gallop could not even shake the shadow shield in front of them, and they had no way of escaping the pursuit of the shadow guards. The scimitar smashed through the holy shield with a crack. Bishop Rubens tripped over the corpse of a guard and fell to the ground. Blood stained his originally crimson robe, and even his magnificent crown fell to the ground. He looked extremely pathetic. Benjamin was still making his last stand, but no matter what spell he cast, the shadow guards were closing in on him step by step. The scimitar was raised, and under Gallop's control, the shadow guards slashed down at Rubens and Benjamin. Rewind time to 2 minutes ago. When Gallop angrily denounced Akasha as a traitor and began to chant the summoning incantation of the shadow guards, the group of people from the monastery not far away from the governor suffered an unexpected calamity. The mercenaries sent by Francis had already charged straight at Sally. The monks and nuns who stood in the way of these killers along the way were brutally slashed and kicked to the ground. The teenage boys and girls were no match for these ferocious fellows. Although Brooke and Ryan wanted to stop them, they did not have the courage to do so, and they did not have a suitable weapon. They were sent flying in a single exchange. When Sally, who was standing at the edge of the group, noticed the situation, she immediately ran towards the crowd in the distance. Whoosh! A crossbow bolt flew past her body, but it didn't hit her. 3 or 4 crossbow bolts that flew towards her were blocked by shields with ding-ding-dang-dang sounds. The 3 or 4 people who suddenly appeared were the mercenaries that Sally had prepared beforehand. At this moment, these mercenaries who were dressed like peddlers were holding fine weapons that they had found in the carriages. They quickly rushed to Sally's back and protected the Duke's daughter tightly. In the distance, Rubens and Benjamin, who were being pressured by the shadow guards, did not notice what was happening. Francis, who was pretending to be hit by an arrow, was staring at his sister who was about to die. But obviously, the mercenaries under Sally had completely exceeded his expectations. Francis, who was holding his injured arm, widened his eyes. He roared at Willie angrily, "Damn it! Didn't you take care of her mercenaries?" Both mercenaries were secretly taken care of, master. Willie did not understand what was going on. Just as he finished speaking, a crossbow arrow pierced through his head. Blood splattered on Francis' face. The Count was shocked and turned around, only to find more than 10 armed mercenaries shooting arrows at him from Sally's side. "Stop them." Another arrow whizzed past him and killed a guard beside him. Francis immediately pulled out his wand and chanted a spell. An ice shield appeared around his body, and after 3 seconds of chanting, he cast a fireball spell. Boom! The mercenaries were blown away. The power of an elementalist was finally revealed. The mercenaries that Sally sent had to protect her and attack Francis at the same time, so they did not pose much of a threat to him. Francis waved his hand and shouted, "Crush them!" The battle between Rose Cross and Viper Cross had just reached its climax, but Francis and Sally's assassination and counter-assassination happened at the same time. Such a chaotic scene made the onlookers and the injured nuns unable to understand what was going on. They could only see the flashing swords and splattering blood. Their ears could only hear the chaotic screams and the muffled sound of weapons colliding with shield. At a certain moment, footsteps could be heard. When they looked up, they saw more than 10 armed thugs rushing towards Sally with ferocious looks in their eyes. Then, there was a series of explosions from the fireballs. If time was frozen, one would see Francis looking at Sally with a ferocious expression. He held his wand and the fire element in front of him was rapidly gathering. His lips moved silently as he silently chanted a spell. Dozens of meters away, Sally, who was protected by layers of mercenaries, was retreating to the distant street. Her face was tense as she ordered her subordinates to bring the horses from the back over amidst the sounds of battle. At the same time, the temple guards in front of Reuben's and Benjamin were cleared. The two shadow guards raised the machetes in their hands and swung them straight down. Snaketooth Gallop, who was more than 10 meters away, smirked. The madness in his eyes could not be concealed. It was as if he could already see the two elders' heads separated from their bodies. From the beginning of this plot, Rubens, Gallop, and Francis had all experienced a miscalculation. At this moment, it seemed that Gallop and Francis were about to become the final winners. However, in the next moment, all of their plans were completely reversed because of a figure that they had completely ignored. An orange-red streak streaked across the sky. Chapter 117. A few of the Viper Cross assassins who were closer did not understand what was happening. They only saw Gallop suddenly lunge forward, his head crashing into the inner side of the shadow shield that could not keep up with the movement in time. His entire body bounced back and fell silently to the ground. In such a scene, the blood that sprayed out like a fountain dyed the entire shadow shield red. Following that, the blood splattered on the ground due to the dissipation of the shield. After turning their eyes to the ground, the people around them realized a shocking fact. Snake Fang Gallop, who was still grinning ferociously a few seconds ago, now had a hole in his chest. His heart had completely disappeared. When they looked over, they could even see through his chest to the ground that was already soaked in blood. Gallop was dead. There were no signs of his death. Most people did not even see what attacked him. At the same time, the shadow guards, that had already swung their scimitars down, lost their bodies due to Gallop's death. The shadow blades sliced through Reuben's and Benjamin's bodies, but did not cause any damage to the two old men. Due to the death of the spellcaster, they immediately lost their original attack power. In the next 2 seconds, they directly turned into drifting black fog. The situation on the battlefield instantly changed. Rubens, who was sitting on the ground, was stunned for a moment. He immediately scrambled to his feet. The scepter in his hand continuously cast several holy shields at the guards that were trying their best to get closer. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Surround them! Counterattack! Counterattack!" Benjamin, who was still in shock, immediately cast 3 or 4 recovery spells. He looked at the long arrow that landed not far away from his feet in bewilderment. The dark red feather, the body of the arrow that had been adjusted and polished. Although the arrowhead had disappeared, Benjamin could still recognize that this was an arrow that was only sold by the Rose Cross. He seemed to have thought of something in his mind, but he was unable to connect the dots due to the chaotic situation in front of him. Releasing his divine arts with all his might, Benjamin did his best to help more soldiers recover their strength and injuries. In this process, the bald, muscular man who had already suffered many injuries roared in anger and grief. He stepped over Gallop's corpse and was about to charge over, but he had just taken 2 steps when a loud shout from not far away caused him to turn his head abruptly. Die! It was a simple and decisive word. Along with it, a short spear was thrown out. The brawny bald man turned around and saw the short spear. He immediately raised his fist to block it. The fist of a gladiator was no weaker than any other weapon, so he was confident that he could knock the short spear away. However, the result was far beyond his imagination. Although his fist hit the short spear and knocked it away, his body lost its balance due to the huge recoil. Astonished, he raised his head and looked into the distance. Just as he was trying to find out who had thrown the short spear, a black shadow had already shot towards him. Pooh! The short spear directly pierced through his chest, and the terrifying force actually pushed his entire body back 3 or 4 steps. While his face was filled with disbelief, before his body fell to the ground, the third short spear had accurately pierced through his neck, shattering his spine and killing him before he could even fall to the ground. When the burly man was killed in 3 seconds, Benjamin strangely noticed that the heretics around him, who were attacking like madmen, had all silently rolled to the ground. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that their hearts had been pierced by arrows. Just as he raised his head to look for the archer, an arrow suddenly flew past him. At the same time, it killed a heretic, causing Benjamin to break out in a cold sweat. This archery! His low voice was interrupted by the hooves of a horse. When he turned his head to look, a group of cavalry had already broken through the human wall and were rushing towards him. The knight at the front was dressed in silver armor, carrying a backpack filled with short spears on his back. Beneath his helmet, his gaze was calm and sharp, and he held an astonishingly heavy metal triangular lance in his hand. As he spurred his horse forward, he had a powerful aura of 1 man against 1,000. In the blink of an eye, the rare warhorse that was 1 size larger than a normal warhorse had covered a distance of nearly 100 meters. The heavy lance flung out a series of afterimages, and the enemy's attempts to dodge and escape were completely futile. More than 7 of the Viper Cross assassins were sent flying, their skulls and chests directly burst open from the heavy blows. Behind the knights were squires and infantrymen. Every single one of them was extremely strong, and all the heretics in the square were immediately crushed. With the arrival of the 4 paladins that were late, the Viper Cross's defeat was irreversible. But at this moment, the sounds of battle occurring in another part of the square immediately attracted Benjamin's attention. Turning his head, he immediately saw Sally hiding behind the mercenaries. Immediately waving his hand, he shouted, "Go stop them! Stop those assassins!" More than 10 holy knights suddenly rushed towards Sally's group, and behind them was a group of holy knights. This immediately caused the mercenaries who were trying to assassinate Sally to be in a difficult position, but it also caused Francis, who originally wanted to take advantage of the situation, to lose the best opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Flustered and exasperated, he stopped in his tracks, and his face was extremely pale. Until now, he still did not know why such a scene had happened. Why did that seemingly powerful shadow priest suddenly die? Why did the Rose Cross coincidentally come to rescue Sally at this time? Francis would never have thought that the thing that ruined all his plans was just a explosive arrow. But the battle did not end there. Surrounded by the mercenaries, Sally kept retreating. She originally wanted to wait for the Holy Cathedral to arrive, but when she saw the crazed and ferocious face of Francis, she remembered what Roddy had told her before. She clenched the dice in her hand tightly, gritted her teeth, and made a decision in her heart. She immediately turned around and jumped into the carriage that the mercenaries brought with them. She shouted, "Leave this place. Go to the west gate. Quickly!" Francis, who had almost given up on the assassination, clearly heard her order. He immediately raised his eyebrows, turned around, and whispered to his men, "Prepare horses for me immediately. Go to the west gate. Bring more people with you." After saying this, he turned around and shouted at the mercenaries that he hired to kill Sally, "You bunch of scum! How dare you surround Sally? Go to hell!" In the explosion of the fireball, Francis tilted his head and confirmed that Knight Titus, who was not far away, had heard what he said. He felt a little relieved. Ignoring the fact that he was injured, he and his men killed all the assassins. Then they disappeared at the corner of the street under the escort of the servants. In the distance, Titus, who was holding a triangular spear, was riding on his horse, stabbing and hacking the heretics to death one after another. His eyes swept across the distance. In the noisy battlefield, no one heard the cold snort under the helmet. At the same time, nearly 100 meters away, in the scattered crowd, Roddy, who was holding the attack bow, reached out and pulled up his hood. His figure was hidden in the shadows, as if he had never participated in the battle. In the middle of the city square, The arrival of the knight Titus and his squire had directly destroyed the confidence of the Viper Cross assassins. By the time the 4 teams of more than 80 holy knights had all arrived, the Viper Cross had completely lost the ability to resist. "Lord Governor, those heretics!" A guard ran over to report the situation to the governor. At this time, he was talking about Akasha and her men. Because these people had been constantly retreating when the battle started, they did not participate in the battle, nor were they attacked. When Rubens heard his question, he suddenly remembered that he had been plotted against by Akasha. He immediately waved his hand and said, "Detain them all. We'll talk about it after this matter is over. They may retaliate, you can use force. Detain them all, no one can be spared." Rubens flicked his sleeve and directly gave the order. The guard jogged away, and after a long time, the wounded on the battlefield were basically taken care of. The governor turned around and saw Benjamin bending over to check the wound on Gallop's body. "What did you find?" "He was shot to death by an arrow." Benjamin held an arrow in his hand and stared at the bowl-sized wound. Ignoring the smell of blood that assaulted his nostrils, he reached out and pulled away the charred pieces of clothing on Gallop's back. An accurate arrow with an explosive effect. It should be the explosive arrow produced by the Holy Cathedral. Arrow? How is that possible? Rubens was stunned. Before this, he was still swearing to Benjamin that there was no need for the guards to equip bows and arrows. Now that he heard the truth, he could not help but feel an indescribable emotion in his heart. He could not believe that Gallop, who was known as troublesome and powerful in the Holy Cathedral, could be killed by an arrow under such circumstances? Could there have been a mistake? Benjamin shook his head. Just as he was about to answer, a conflict broke out between the Holy Cathedral guards on the other side in order to subdue Akasha and her subordinates. There were shouts and screams. Not long after, the Holy Knights rushed over and the situation was immediately under control. The leader of the Knights quickly rushed over and bowed his head in apology. "Lord Governor, our troops were surrounded by a group of mercenaries on 3rd Avenue. If not for Knight Titus..." He briefly explained the reason for being late just now. Only then did Rubens understand that there was someone else who obstructed the cavalry. Obviously, his meticulous plan had been foiled by an unknown force. When he thought about it, he was especially grateful for the arrow that killed Gallop. Although he still did not know who was helping him, it was undeniable that the arrow had changed the entire situation. Because if not for this arrow, Rubens and Benjamin would definitely be killed on the spot. The morale of the Holy Cathedral guards would definitely collapse. The Rose Cross would definitely leave a shameful mark in history. Thinking of this, Rubens let out a sigh of relief. He looked at the silver-armored knight who arrived first and asked Benjamin, "Who is he?" "It's Knight Titus, the most capable subordinate of the Dukes of Angmar. I did not expect him to appear here." Benjamin let out a sigh of relief. He was also tormented by the intensity of the battle. However, when he mentioned this name, he thought of something else. He muttered to himself, could it be that the Dukes of Angmar? Rubens did not have the time to listen to his deductions. At this time, the city square where thousands of people gathered had turned into a river of blood. Looking up, there were dead bodies and injured people everywhere. After such a bloody conflict ended, there were too many things for the Rose Cross to do. So, he ignored the exhaustion of his body and began to command the scene with his scepter. Not long after, the guard who had ended the battle reported the news of Akasha's disappearance. This made the governor's face suddenly turn gloomy, and he immediately issued an order coldly: she must be recovered, dead or alive. Chapter 118. The sound of galloping horses echoed in the streets of Hollier, and the sound of whips breaking through the air could be heard clearly. The simple carriage jolted abnormally on the uneven road, and the wooden wheels made a loud clanking noise. The pedestrians on the road had heard the noise from afar, so they had already moved to the side. They could only watch as the carriage whizzed past them, and they could even see the wheels dangling in the air when the carriage passed through a sharp bend. Sally had never been in a carriage that was moving so fast. Her face was pale, and her hands were tightly gripping the wooden frame of the carriage beside her. She tried her best to scan the streets around her. Although she was nervous, she didn't show any signs of panic. She just told Martin, who was driving the carriage, "Take the shortest route. After we get out of the West City Gate, follow the road." "Yes, miss." Martin might not be good at fighting, but he was an expert at driving. Originally, he did not need to participate with the mercenaries, but yesterday, Sally suddenly ordered him to prepare a carriage. So today, he appeared with the mercenaries at the side of the square, and at this moment, he brought the daughter of Duke and galloped all the way. At first, he did not understand why, but a few minutes ago, when he saw the mercenaries who were originally escorting the carriage turned around to intercept a group of knights, he understood Sally's intention. If they did not do this, the ferocious enemies would definitely hack Sally to death. Although they had escaped, Martin still had his own worries. He shouted loudly, trying to cover the noise of the carriage, "The road outside the city gate is not fast. If those people continue to chase, they will definitely catch up." This was something that Sally had not considered. Although she had come up with many countermeasures, this decision was ultimately made at the last minute, and it was inevitable that she would be careless. She frowned and replied, "Do you have any ideas?" "There is a relay station near the West Gate. Our men are there. We can change horses there and continue to run." Martin's brain was not slow, and he quickly came up with a feasible plan. Sally immediately made the decision, but she was still a little worried. She knew that her horsemanship was very poor. Even if she changed horses, she would probably not be able to run as fast as those well-trained mercenaries. However, this kind of emotion was quickly replaced by boundless anger in his heart. The repeated assassination attempts had made Sally consider the name Francis as one of the names that should be slashed into pieces. Once at the border, once at the entrance of the cloister, and now again in the square. Who could endure living in fear like this? So a few minutes ago, Sally finally decided to go to the West City Gate because there was only one thought in her mind at this time: Francis must die. She could have accepted the help of the Rose Cross and avoided the conflict, but that would only result in a stalemate. But if Francis continued to be at large, she knew that she would not be able to fight against him in the end. Therefore, she had placed all her hopes on Roddy. Sally trusted this scout captain unreservedly. Her life was now in his hands. Under Martin's skillful control, the carriage sped along. After galloping for close to 10 minutes, the 10-meter-tall West City Gate finally appeared before Sally's eyes. "This way." Martin stopped the carriage abruptly. The deceleration almost caused Sally to fall off the carriage. Martin threw the horsewhip in his hand and ran to the courier station by the roadside. Soon, he led the two horses and ran over. Sally did not say anything. She grabbed the corner of her robe and jumped off the carriage. She quickly jumped onto the horse's back, grabbed the reins, and rushed forward. Martin knew that Sally was not good at riding, so he immediately ran in front to clear the way and shouted to the pedestrians to avoid them. Although they moved fast, they still wasted some time. After running for a short distance, they heard the rapid sound of hooves behind them. Sally looked back. A group of cavalrymen had already turned the corner and rushed towards them. Obviously, the mercenaries she sent out could not completely stop Francis. At this time, there were about 24 or 25 people chasing after them. Although she could not see if Francis was among them, it was obvious that they did not come with good intentions. It was impossible for her to fight them head-on. She looked at the west city gate that was getting closer and closer. Immediately, a map of the surrounding area appeared in her mind. From the west city gate, they would enter the Cobb Forest in less than a kilometer. The forest was foggy all year round. If they did not follow the road, they would easily get lost. If they followed the road, they would have to travel 40 kilometers to get out of the forest and reach the town. Sally knew that her horsemanship was not good. If she continued to run like this, she would definitely be caught by the pursuers after another 3 kilometers. However, she had no other choice but to kick her horse's abdomen with all her might. She passed through the city gate and rushed towards the dimly lit forest. "Miss, we will be caught soon. Should we leave the main road?" Martin shouted in front of her. His suggestion was also the only feasible one. Leave the main road and take a few turns in the complicated forest. It was still possible to get rid of the mercenaries, but Sally immediately shook her head and replied without hesitation, "Follow the road." The white hem of her robe fluttered in the strong wind. After leaving the city, the originally slippery stone road was replaced by loose soil. The war horses also sped up a little. The pursuers behind them did not immediately close the gap because of the fatigue of the horses. This proved that Sally could still hold on for a while. But it was only for a while. Sally kept looking back at the pursuers. But the unexpected arrow that would kill them did not appear. In her mind, Roddy would not be able to resist the pursuers. Except for a sneak attack, Sally could not think of any other way for Roddy to solve the problem in front of them. Although he was strong, he was only one person after all. With these thoughts in mind, after running for a distance, Sally looked back once again and discovered that the 20 or so knights were gradually catching up to her. Roddy, he will definitely appear. Her thoughts began to become a little uncertain. Sally and Martin had already rushed into the Cobb Forest. As they continued to move forward along the path, she even imagined that Roddy had prepared enough traps to deal with the knights. But after running for a kilometer, the pursuers were getting closer and closer. They did not receive any attacks at all. "Miss, they will catch up with us soon. It is not too late to enter the forest. I will go back and stop them." "No, continue to run." Sally interrupted his words. Although she was a little hesitant, her idea was very simple. Since she believed in Roddy, she would believe him to the end. "It's really too late." Now Martin, who was eager to save his master, controlled the reins and turned a sharp corner along the road. But the words he wanted to say were suddenly stuck in his throat. Sally turned her gaze from behind and was completely stunned by the scene in front of her. On the road in front of them, a neat team of knights was lined up as if they had been waiting here for a long time. Tall military horses, shining silver swords, neat armors, and the piercingly cold aura that definitely belonged to elite knights. What is going on? Sally and Martin were completely stunned. They let the horses continue to gallop forward for dozens of meters before they remembered to tighten the reins. When they completely stopped, their hearts were in their throat. If these knights were arranged by Francis, they were afraid that they would not be able to escape today. She never thought that these knights were Roddy's subordinate. After all, Roddy's identity was clear. He was just a captain of a village at the border. Scout captain? Sally's eyes widened. She suddenly remembered something. She looked at the leading knight and suddenly felt that he seemed a little familiar. At this time, Francis was very excited. Although the plan could not keep up with the changes, and the people he sent out failed to kill Sally on the spot in the city square, now this silly sister actually fled to the west gate in panic after he gave up. No matter how he looked at it, it could be said that his luck had turned for the better. Because he had gathered all the available men in advance, he immediately organized a team of more than 40 knights to chase after Sally after leaving the square. Sally was not to be trifled with. She forcefully blocked half of the team with the help of the mercenaries, but Francis did not care. He rushed out with his 24 men to get rid of the entanglement, all for the sake of killing Sally as soon as possible. When he chased all the way from Hollier City, Francis still had some scruples in his heart because he was afraid that Knight Titus would notice him. Because every time he saw him, Francis had an inexplicable feeling that his father seemed to be standing behind the whole situation, silently overlooking everything. Although he knew that his father was seriously ill in bed and did not know what was going on, some of the scenes he remembered when he was a child were deeply imprinted in his mind. 14 years ago, there was a period of time when the family had a tense relationship with several nearby lords. His father was even seriously injured by an assassin in front of his mansion. At that time, many nobles in Hollier City thought that the Lucifron family's fate had come to an end. However, his father did not respond to all the voices at that time. He just quietly recuperated and did not give any response. At that time, Francis thought that his father was afraid. But then he saw one knight after another rushing from the fief to Hollier City. When these knights led their squires to form an army of more than 1,000 people, the Dukes of Angmar, who had recovered from their injuries, directly led them and trampled on the territories of those lords without any nonsense. He still remembered the scene when the knights returned from the war in their blood-soaked armor and walked through the city gate. Among them, the most powerful Knight Titus and Knight Wellington were walking beside his father. Their tall figures were like God of War, leaving an indelible impression on Francis. Every time Francis saw the two knights, he would always think of his father sitting silently in front of the fireplace. But now, it seemed that his father would not appear. He was so sick, how could he intervene in such a matter? As for Knight Titus, he glanced around in front of him. There was no other figure in the wilderness. Humph, let's see how long you can hold on. Chapter 119. Although Francis was good at riding, he was still not as good as the mercenaries who relied on fighting for a living. Therefore, he gradually fell behind the team. However, he was not in a hurry. Sally was getting closer and closer. In another minute or two, she would definitely be caught. Francis smiled slightly, as if he could already see the scene of Sally being cut into pieces by swords and knives. Tsk, you chose this path yourself. He thought for a moment and shouted to the scattered mercenaries in front of him, I'll give 100 gold coins to the first person who catches her. These words were like a curse, causing the mercenaries to yell and charge forward. They spurred their horses forward as if they were in a race, fighting to be the first to catch Sally. This caused the already disorganized formation to become even more disorganized. Don't you dare compete with me, the leading mercenary shouted excitedly. He was the best horseman among them, so he waved his scimitar and rushed to the front. He watched Sally and Martin disappear at the end of the bend in the forest path. He immediately tilted his body to the left, trying to balance the center, so that the warhorse could rush through the bend at the fastest speed. Where do you think you're going? When he shouted this sentence, it was rather imposing. However, as his warhorse turned the corner, the domineering aura instantly disappeared without a trace like a deflated balloon. His subsequent words were stuck in his throat like a duck that had its neck stepped on. He clearly remembered that the targets he was chasing were an unarmed nun and a coachman who didn't even wear leather armor. But how did 3 rows of fully armed knights suddenly appear in front of him? This isn't AF** King Dream, right? Where was the nun? Where was the coachman? The mercenaries' brains seemed to have crashed. They continued to run forward with their eyes wide open. However, the cavalry in the distance did not give them any time to react. Without any nonsense, the leading knight raised his hand and made a few strange gestures. Then, he simply made a downward movement. Then, the 29 cavalrymen suddenly began to move forward. The moment they began to gallop, the momentum that was like a volcanic eruption immediately made the mercenaries who had turned the bend shiver. For an ordinary cavalry troop, when the commanding officer shouted, "Charge" or "Move out," the knights basically began to accelerate in a disorderly manner. Then, after charging for hundreds of meters, they could form a similar formation to increase their lethality. However, the troop in front of them had exerted all their strength from the moment they set off. In less than 20 meters, they had completely formed a neat charging formation. When they were 50 meters away, they had maintained their formation and entered into a state of full speed. This was almost impossible in the mercenaries' eyes. Even if they thought that they had been through hundreds of battles, it would be difficult for them to charge in such a uniform pace. Compared to them, their charging was simply as childish and ridiculous as children's games. When Francis, who was at the back of the team, turned around the corner and looked forward with a proud smile, he almost fell off his horse because of the scene in front of him. What the hell is going on? Francis clenched his wand tightly. Of course, he would not be naive enough to think that there just happened to be a team practicing their formation. His heart instantly turned cold. He could not figure out where Sally found such a group of cavalry. Judging from their momentum and the quality of their horses, he knew that they were not ordinary mercenaries. It was not a matter of whether they had the money to hire them, but it was a matter of whether they could find them or not. Francis did not even have a few seconds to think. He only froze for a few seconds before he shouted in panic, "Face the enemy! Face the enemy!" The mercenaries who were originally scared out of their wits finally regained their senses. One by one, they looked to the front and pulled out their weapons. In a hurry, they rushed towards the group of cavalry and began to charge head-on. And the result of such a battle was already determined from the beginning. Mercenaries who were used to fighting on foot for a long time would definitely not be able to immediately become qualified cavalry after riding on a horse. Not to mention the compatibility with the warhorse, just the combat skills on horseback were far from being mastered in a day or two. Francis himself was only good at riding, but he knew absolutely nothing about cavalry combat, not to mention formation and charging skills. None of the mercenaries were originally cavalry, so after hastily assembling a broken formation, they could only rely on their ferociousness to charge forward. But unfortunately, on the battlefield, victory was definitely not obtained by relying on ferociousness. When Sodeler took the lead and charged into the group of mercenaries, that fierce and imposing aura was simply too much for the mercenaries to bear. Swoosh! The long sword slashed across, and with an unparalleled momentum, a mercenary's head was directly sent flying. Blood splattered, and before the head fell to the ground, Ruger's sword had already slashed across the chest of the second mercenary, causing that person to fall directly from his horse. Then, after the violent collision between the two sides, the sound of weapons clashing almost resounded through the forest. Screams instantly spread, but were quickly drowned out by the sound of hooves. From another point of view, the battle seemed to be evenly matched, with 29 people on one side and 24 on the other. But when they really collided, the huge gap was instantly highlighted. In just one charge, not a single one of the 29 scouts fell off their horses. Just like that, they flattened the group of mercenaries, leaving no chance for the group of mercenaries. The contact between the two parties lasted no more than 10 seconds. When the two parties separated due to the inertia of the charging horses, the number of the scouts did not change, but the mercenaries were completely crushed. All that was left was a large area of warhorses without riders, and only 7 people were still sitting on the saddles. Blood dripped from the long sword. Sodeler glanced left and right. The scouts led by Carter and Ruger had already adjusted their formation in 5 or 6 seconds. Some people were injured, but they still maintained their combat power. He raised his hand and gave the command for the second charge, and the entire team immediately began to turn around in the narrow jungle road. During this process, none of the soldiers made a sound. They all held their swords and carried out the command. This scene sent chills down the spines of the surviving mercenaries. In this era where communication was basically based on roaring, if a team could reach such a level of tacit understanding and strength without using words, then the word battle-hardened elite soldiers wouldn't be enough to describe their valiance. Seeing this, the mercenaries who had been slaughtered lost all their courage to continue fighting. Since Francis had disappeared without a trace, they had lost their backbone, so they simply threw away their weapons and chose to surrender. At the same time, Sally, who had witnessed all this from afar, was completely shocked. She could not even say a word. Were these the same scouts who helped to evacuate the Fanks village? Sally's memory had never been bad. She remembered Captain Sodeler, who was charging at the front, and Carter, who liked to talk loudly. She also remembered the rest of the faces, so she was sure that she had not mistaken them for someone else. But when did the scouts from the border village become so strong? Sally even suspected that her memory was messed up. Was it a few years ago when they escaped from the Fanks village? It had only been a few months since they last saw each other, and this group of scouts had become a group of killing machines that emitted valiant auras from all over their bodies. Anyone could see that these soldiers were definitely not just strong. Their eyes, movements, and fearlessness all showed that they were tough veterans who had survived many wars. Although many of their faces were still very young, their fierceness were definitely not something that could be faked. All the questions in her mind pointed to Roddy. Sally stared blankly at the scene in front of her. It was not until the mercenaries in the distance collectively surrendered that she remembered to check what happened to Francis. Martin was also scared out of his wits, but he knew what Sally was thinking. He immediately rushed to the battlefield and checked the captives guarded by the scout. He reported a piece of news that made Sally frown. "Francis has escaped. Team 1, follow me to chase after him. The rest of you, clean up the battlefield," Sodeler ordered from afar. As soon as he finished speaking, 8 people immediately rushed over on horseback and stood in formation. Their movements were neat and uniform. They did not set off immediately after they gathered, because they needed to confirm the direction of the pursuit. However, in the eyes of an expert tracker like Sodeler, the traces of Francis's escape were too obvious. "There are horse tracks here. Someone in their team turned into the forest from here. Team 1, get ready. Captain Sodeler." Sally, who had rushed over on horseback, interrupted him. She actually had a lot of questions to ask, but thinking that this was all part of Roddy's plan, she finally chose not to interfere. She just said bluntly, "The guy who escaped is an elementalist. He's very strong." This kind of reminder was very obvious. Sodeler naturally knew who he was referring to, but he didn't explain anything. He just took a few steps into the forest by the side of the road, pointed at the traces on the ground, and said in a low voice, "It's true that one of the mercenaries left the team, but it's clear that the guy behind him chased after him. The one who followed him is Roddy?" Sally's eyes widened. Roddy actually went after Francis? Sodeler did not deny it. He just nodded, indicating that he would leave the rest to them. Then he turned around and got on his horse, ready to follow the traces. However, Sally did not plan to stay here. Whenever she thought of her brother's title of Elementalist and the potions and scrolls he always carried, Sally could not be at ease with Roddy. Roddy's strength lay in sneak attacks, but when it came to a one-on-one battle with an advanced Elementalist, especially when the opponent carried a lot of magic tools, the pressure he faced was far greater than when he faced the orcs. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.